tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I'll be the first to admit that I'm not what you or anyone would call a productive member of society. I've never held a steady job. I don't see the point in wasting money on college for a degree I'm never going to use, and I barely graduated high school. I enjoy doing what I do. I spend my days watching TV, playing video games, and getting drunk in my mom's basement. What's the point in getting a job anyway? It's not like I need money for anything. I live in my mom's house that she inherited from my grandfather that he had already paid off when he was still alive, so there's no mortgage payment. And my mom buys all the food I need and whatever else I ask her to get. Why would I want to spend my days working at a job I hate when I can just sleep and do whatever else I want? I suppose one could make the argument that it would be embarrassing to bring a woman over to my mom's house to have sex, but I don't really see the need for dating either. If I get horny enough, I just watch some porn. And then 5 minutes later, I'm good again. No awkward after-sex conversations or trying to get her to leave afterwards. I just either go back to watching TV or fall asleep. My life is perfect. Correction. Was perfect. Everything changed for me the other day. I'm still not quite sure how, but everything seemed to go to hell pretty quick. The day started out just like any other. I woke up, played some video games, ate breakfast, and then went back to playing video games. Everything was going great until my mom started nagging me from upstairs.
Frank?
She called down. I didn't answer her. I was too busy strategizing my next combat move and trying not to get killed by other players.
Frank!
She yelled again, louder this time. What? I yelled back upstairs, not bothering to take my eyes off the battlefield I was in and barely even paying any attention to her.
I'm going out to run some errands,
she shouted.
While I'm gone, I want you to vacuum upstairs and put the dishes away.
I groaned in response. Why did I have to do anything? This was her house. If she wanted it clean, then she should just fucking clean it and leave me alone.
Did you hear me?
She called down. Yeah, I heard you, I shouted back up at her.
Get it done.
She yelled back.
I don't ask much of you, but if you're going to live here for free, the least you can do is help out around the house.
The least I could do would be fucking nothing, I muttered to myself.
I'll be back in a while,
she called out again. I grunted in response and returned my full attention back to the game I was playing. Needless to say, I didn't clean the house or do anything my mom had asked. In fact, I hadn't gotten up at all since she left. At some point, I turned off the game and rolled back onto my bed and fell asleep for a while. When I woke up, it was late afternoon. I decided I had better go take a piss and then grab something to eat from the kitchen. Hey, Mom! What'd you get for us to eat? I shouted as I walked up the stairs from my basement room to the kitchen. My mom didn't answer me. Mom? I asked again. There was still no answer. I looked out into the driveway and saw her car parked there, so I knew she had to be home. Fuck it. I opened the fridge and grabbed some lunch meat to make myself a sandwich. When I closed the door, I saw my mom walking towards me, and I let the lunch meat fall to the floor. Fucking hell! I yelled in shock. My mom was hideous. Her skin looked rotted, Her eyes were milky white, and when she spoke, a low moan came from her throat. "Stay back, Mom!" I yelled as I backed away from her. The thing that used to be my mom groaned and reached her gross, decaying arms out towards me. "I said stay away from me!" I shouted again, as my hand felt around the kitchen counter, never once taking my eyes off her. My hand grasped the hilt of something, and without looking to see what it was, I swung it towards my mother's head. The kitchen knife stuck out of my mother's forehead as she staggered backwards, an almost confused look on her disgusting face as she uttered another low groan. Quickly, I stepped back and began rummaging through the kitchen drawers. A feeling of excitement crept over me as I spotted the meat cleaver and grabbed it. Without waiting for my mother to recover, I brought the cleaver down on my mother's head over and over again until it was split down to her nose. She was finally dead. Well, dead. I had destroyed her brain. Anyone who's ever seen a zombie movie or played a video game knows that it's the only sure way to kill a zombie. I backed away from my mother's corpse until my back was against the wall and then slowly slid to the ground. What have I done? I thought to myself. My mom is dead. My mom is dead and I killed her. No, I told myself. No, I didn't kill her. She was already dead. Something else killed her and turned her into a flesh-eating zombie. I did what I had to do, otherwise I'd be dead too. Several thoughts went through my head at once. Who turned my mom into a zombie? How long did it take for her to turn? How many more of them were there? Banging at the front door caught my attention and snapped me out of my thoughts. Cautiously, I made my way over to the door and slowly moved my head close enough to look through the peephole. Christ almighty, I whispered out loud to no one. At least 3 zombies, all males, as far as I could tell, were making their way towards the outside of my door. I jumped back when one of them began pounding on the door, groaning loudly. I quickly slid the deadbolt and the other 2 locks on the door in place. They're everywhere, I thought to myself as I backed away from the door, trying to think about what to do next. I made a run for the basement. I know what to do. I have to stop this as much as I can, I thought to myself as I got to the basement floor and made my way to the door at the back of my room. I have to save whoever I can. I opened the door and a wave of relief washed over me as I looked at the wide array of guns and ammunition that was displayed before me. My grandfather had been a huge gun advocate and a bit of a conspiracy nut when he was alive. At least I thought he was a nut at the time. Now, I was just glad he had stockpiled the basement with so many weapons. I knew that I had to be practical. AK-47s may be able to shoot a lot of rounds, but they were heavy to carry, and I didn't want to have to worry about wasting bullets. I figured I could always come back for those guns later, if I needed to. I grabbed a standard 9mm that was able to hold 20 rounds of ammo plus 1 in the chamber, for a total of 21 shots until I would need to reload a new clip. Ammunition was going to be the key here, not the number of guns I could carry. This wasn't like the movies, where the hero looked cool, shooting a gun in each hand. That wasn't practical or realistic. It was smarter to have one gun and as many clips of spare ammo that I could carry with me. I tucked the 9mm into the waistband of my pants, 2 clips of ammo forward in each of my front pockets. as well as one more in each of my back pockets for a total of 6 ammo clips. That was the total of 147 bullets, including the clip already loaded. I also loaded a 12-gauge shotgun with 6 rounds and dumped a whole case of ammo for it into a small backpack that was also in the room. The 9mm was good, but I wanted to bring something extra that packed a more powerful blast in case I needed it. I threw a few more clips for the 9mm into the backpack as well, along with 3 grenades that my grandfather had stored there. Those were definitely going to be for an emergency-only scenario. I stared at the beautiful Colt Python 357 Magnum that I was leaving behind. But again, it wouldn't be practical to take it. It had a kind of powerful kick to it and could do some real damage, but it could only hold 6 shots and took a long time to empty spent bullets and reload new ones. No. I would leave here along with the AK-47s. Could always come back later. Right now, I needed speed and accuracy to be on my side. I heard the banging at the front door from upstairs getting louder and louder, and realized that more zombies must be trying to get in. This is where the shotgun would come in handy. I grabbed the backpack and slung it over my shoulders as I ran upstairs. I stopped in front of the door and took several deep breaths before slowly sliding back the deadbolt and unlocking the door. Then I quickly threw open the door, raised the shotgun, and fired. An explosion of blood and gore was spattered on the grass as the zombie closest to me had been thrown backwards by the blast. A now nearly headless body lying still as blood pulsed from the wound. "Yes!" I shouted out loud. "Headshot!" A loud groan made me turn to my left as what used to be a large black man reached out for me. "Shit!" I said, as I raised the shotgun up quickly while pulling the trigger just as the zombie grabbed me. The blast blew off the top of the zombie's head, leaving only his lower jaw and wagging tongue still attached to his neck. I pushed the corpse off of me and got to my feet as fast as I could. "Double shit!" I shouted as another zombie was coming towards me, more quickly than I would have thought. As I pulled the trigger, I thought the zombie almost looked angry at me. But then again, it was a zombie, and it wanted to eat my flesh, so who cares if it looked angry or not? I aimed for its head and pulled the trigger. The top left portion of the zombie man's head was blown off, exposing parts of his brain tissue before it fell to his knees and then crumpled to the ground. I turned to see several more zombies clustered in a group not far from me. Damn it, I thought to myself, as I quickly slid the backpack off of my shoulders and rummaged through it. My hand closed around one of the grenades, and I pulled the pin. Pull the pin, count to 5, I thought to myself, remembering what my grandfather had taught me about them. Or was it 3? "Fuck it," I said out loud as I threw the grenade at the group of zombies. The explosion sent the bodies sprawling to the ground. The ones that had been closest to the grenade had damage done to their legs, exposing bloody tissue and bone. They continued to groan and crawl along the ground. I pulled out the 9mm and walked up to each one of them and put a bullet in their heads as they looked up at me. I could almost imagine that their moans were pleas of help. "I'm sorry," I said as I squeezed the trigger. I counted 7 bodies around me, counting my mother and the 3 zombies I killed in front of my house. That brought the total to 11. I turned around when I heard the familiar wailing of a police siren. Oh, thank God, I thought as I made my way over to the police car as it stopped in front of me. My heart dropped when I saw a zombified police officer exit the vehicle. "Motherfucker!" I shouted as I raised the shotgun to fire. Gunshot rang through the air, and an excruciating pain came from my knee as I dropped to the ground. Fuck! I screamed as I looked at the bleeding wound in my leg. Freeze! I heard the zombie cop shout out as it raised its gun at me. It shot me. The fucking zombie had actually shot me. Drop your weapons, it shouted as it moved closer to me. Stay on the ground. I began to raise my shotgun again when a thought suddenly screamed in my mind. Zombies don't talk. More information began to flood my brain. They also don't shoot guns or drive cars. The zombie police officer slowly walked closer to me as I heard it speak again. Really speak. Do not move, it shouted, keeping its gun raised at me. As the zombie moved in even closer, its hideous, rotted features shifted to resemble a normal-looking man. Drop your weapons, he shouted. On your stomach, arms where I can see them. Confusion filled my mind. What the hell is going on? I thought. I could have sworn this guy was a zombie. The police officer kicked the shotgun away out of my reach and then reached into my waistband and tossed my 9mm aside. Hands behind your back, he shouted at me. Now! I did as he said, and saw more police cars and officers arrive. Some of them went to the bodies of the zombies I had killed, but most just stood there and looked at me in shock with their hands on their guns. The police officer who had shot me in the leg secured my wrists with zip ties before pulling me to my feet. Pain shot through my leg as I attempted to shift some weight off of it. Franklin Brown, the officer shouted at me. You are under arrest for multiple murders. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. My mind was still spinning from everything that just happened in the last few minutes. It took a moment for what the officer had said to register. Murder, I finally managed to say. I haven't murdered anyone. I've just been killing the zombies that were roaming in the neighborhood. Zombies? One of the officers said to me as they forced me into the back of one of the police cars. There aren't any zombies. We had a call from several residents that they heard a woman scream from one of these houses, and then, when neighbors went to investigate, there were reports of a gunman shooting and killing everyone in sight. My mind was still catching up to what the officer was saying. No, they were zombies, I shouted at them. Check and see. Their flesh is all rotted and decayed. Another officer stepped over to us. They're all dead, sir, she said. Gunshot wounds to the head for all of them. It looks like some had also been injured by some sort of explosive device. The officer who had shot and cuffed me looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. What the fuck did you do? He asked in a voice that was trying to contain his rage. I was trying to protect everyone, I shouted, almost hysterically. My mom came home and attacked me. I trailed off, trying to remember the events of the day. I had woken up, played video games, masturbated, played more video games. My mom had said she was going to run some errands, and then when she came home, she was a zombie. Wait, I thought. She came home. So when did she become a zombie? I tried to remember harder. I couldn't remember seeing any wounds on her before she attacked me. No, I thought. Not before she attacked me. before she came near me. A faint memory of hearing my mother scream before I stabbed her with a kitchen knife echoed in my mind, followed by more screams as I brought the meat cleaver down on her skull again and again. The only wounds on my mother's body had been the ones I had caused myself. Another memory of the zombies outside groaning in pain after the grenade exploded and then looking up at me, pleading at me with their eyes before I shot each one in the head. The faces in my mind shifted between the rotted, decayed flesh of the undead to normal, terrified neighbors I had seen almost every day. "Oh, God, no," I said as I sat there in the police car, tears forming in the corner of my eyes. "Oh, God, what have I done? What have I done?"
Chilling tales for dark nights. Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcast Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs, and become a patron today to show your support and get instant access to our extensive archive of downloadable tales of terror. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show. Disclaimer. Horror Hill is a horror anthology podcast bringing you scary stories from all corners of the internet and beyond. As such, certain stories include content that some listeners might find offensive. Specifically, tonight's story includes violence against children and themes of white supremacy. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Horror Hill. I'm your host, Eric Peabody. Tonight, we have a story that's a bit different than our usual fare. Don't worry, there are certainly supernatural scares to be had here, but more prominently, it features some real-life horrors. The title is Eden, and it's written by Christian Wallace. Christian's work has been featured on previous episodes of this show, but this one was published on Reddit less than 2 weeks ago. Since I follow Christian's account, I saw it pretty quickly, and after reading it, immediately decided that we needed to feature it on this show. This is a story about hate. Not hate against an individual that has wronged you, but the type of hate that's pounded into you. The type of hate that some people use to define themselves. The type of hate that poisons not only the individual, but the society in which they live. Topical stuff. And while this subject matter is unsavory in a different sort of way than we usually feature, it's also one of the best written stories I've had the chance to read in my 4-year tenure on this show. So, with all that in mind, it's time to venture into Eden. You're listening to the free edition of this program. If you'd like to help support Horror Hill and also remove these pesky ads, head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. You'll get instant access to hundreds of ad-free stories, so what are you waiting for? Also, if you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor and drop a like and subscribe. Become part of our Dark Circle, listeners. And now, from author Christian Wallace, I give you Eden. The kid I shot was called Abner Howard. He had spent all summer looking at me when he thought no one was looking. Didn't recognize it straight away. If anything, I did my best to avoid catching anyone's attention. Abner was an older camper and a nasty piece of shit who spent his time catcalling girls way too young for him and smoking cigarettes with some of the counselors. But when he wasn't strutting around the place like a chimp pacing its enclosure, I would often catch him looking at me in furtive glances. I guess he thought he was being subtle about it, but he wasn't. And one day, his friends noticed. He looked at me, then they looked at him. A subtle tilt of the head. That was all it took for them to convey their suspicion, and in a desperate bid to save face, Abner stood up from the railing he was perched on and cried out, "What the fuck do you think you're looking at, pretty boy?" And I just had to be clever, didn't I? "Aw, you think I'm pretty, Abner?" He grabbed me. The others joined in. A knee to the chest pushed me into sodden mud as Abner's rain-slick hands gripped my jaw. "Won't be so fucking pretty now, huh?" Abner slid a pocket knife into the fat of my cheek and went to work. But it was wet and his hands were shaking. The blade skipped across my cheekbone like a stone across water. The tip of the blade nicked the eye and carved up my brow and forehead, leaving a gouge that'd forever remind me of tectonic drift. By the time my cries attracted any attention from the counselors, I was sobbing and running in circles, bloodied hands groping desperately at open air. I remember screaming for my mother, my gut twisting itself in knots. I wanted someone to enforce some logic back onto the world, some semblance of sanity. But the authorities at the Eden Reformation and Reclamation Project were not sane. They bundled me into a private cabin and wouldn't let me speak to anyone or make a call. I was kept prisoner for 2 days before they finally bribed some drunken vet to try and patch me up. When I told one of the counselors who stood guard outside my door that they'd be sorry once my dad found out what had happened on their watch, he snorted and replied, "Who do you think recommended the vet?" Should have figured. Dad was the reason I was sent here. He didn't like me wearing eyeliner, so when it was his turn to have me for the weekend after my 14th birthday, he decided to take me on a trip. If you can believe it, I was actually excited because even though he'd always been a dick to me, he was my dad and I wanted him to like me. But as soon as we passed state lines, he pulled up on the side of this road and we waited for a full 3 hours. Wouldn't answer any of my questions, just smoked one cigarette after another. Eventually, this van drove up and 3 guys with masks got out. I asked Dad what was going on, but he said nothing, as they dragged me from my seat, cable-tied me, and threw me in the back of their van. After that came the absolute nightmare that was Eden. They didn't explicitly label themselves a white supremacist camp, nor did they particularly tout their gay conversion therapies. The kind of people who sent their kids to Eden didn't want any official connection to that sort of thing. But the camp's motto was setting America's youth straight, and their flag was a red flag with a white circle that encompassed a Germanic-looking crucifix. Where they operated, in the Appalachian woods, far from prying eyes, Eden and its organizers were able to adorn our cabin's walls with swastikas and force us to watch hours and hours of revisionist documentaries that taught us the wrong people won World War II. Our practice targets at the firing range were racially charged mugshots. Our team names were slurs. One morning, prayers were in German, and we shaved SS symbols into each other's heads for a mixture of fun and punishment. Officially, Eden was just one of many camps for troubled teens. But the camp wasn't there to convert or fix any of us, despite its promises. It was a meat grinder meant to spit out psychopaths, to sift through each year's attendees until they'd found the most promising candidates for recruitment into the movement, to blur the line between guard and prisoner, and watch with thin-lipped excitement at the resulting carnage. The counselors set out to torture, and the most important tool in their arsenal was us. It wasn't the counselors who force-fed one girl roadkill because she dared to try sticking to a vegetarian diet, and it wasn't counselors who tore the stud right out of one boy's tongue after he'd successfully hid it for the first few days. It was the kids, the ones who wanted to be fixed, who wanted their wide-necked fathers to finally look at them like they weren't dog shit on the bottom of a shoe. The worst tradition was called the Wild Hunt, when counselors would pick the weakest kid to be that week's deer and send them running naked into the woods while everyone else went after them armed with air rifles that could break the skin. There were no points in that game, no incentive. Only a certain kind of kid would pull the trigger just for fun. Finding those kids, singling them out for recruitment. That was the point. I pulled the trigger. I never bought into Eden's racist bullshit, but the genius of a lot of cults is that they don't always ask you to care that much about belief. Until I attended, I wouldn't have even thought of myself as a cruel or angry person. But the machine worked, and it didn't work just once. It worked again and again and again. The psychopaths Eden spat out, they didn't always start out as bullies. Many probably started out more like me because it was about teaching kids that you hurt others before they hurt you, and its lessons were written in blood and bruises. Abner gave me a chance to hurt him when he wrote me a strange and confused apology letter and slid it beneath my door. I still don't know why he wrote it, though I figure he must have been as dumb and confused as any other kid, I suppose. But in that letter, Abner tried to explain himself. I don't remember the words in detail on account of the anger it set off in me. Even a sincere apology tastes like piss when you've got an eyeball weeping pus. But what really set me on fire was the implication that somehow I was to blame for his actions. I just ain't used to seeing cute boys. I remember reading those words clear as day. I don't know how to describe how angry they made me. A fat man exploding in my chest and my head. A piece of the sun laid gently in my skull and left to burn for all eternity. I still feel it now, that anger. It's something I'll never forget. I showed Abner's letter, complete with all its description of his confused feelings, to the counselors. And when I finally got off bed rest a few days later, I found that there had been an important change in the camp's dynamics. Where Abner had once lurched around the camp, threatening any poor kid who made the mistake of rubbing him the wrong way, he now skulked in the shadows and stayed out of sight. When his friends walked by, he flinched. When they made hateful jokes with slurs for punchlines, he tried to awkwardly laugh it off, but that only made it worse. They didn't want his camaraderie, not anymore. Not after the counselors had made him stand in front of the whole camp as they read out the confessional he'd left me. His friends kicked him out of the older boy's cabin. Counselors wouldn't let him into the others, so he had to sleep in a tent. I remember getting up one night and looking outside to see one of the guys taking a piss on it. I could tell by the light that Abner was inside, but he was just hiding in the corner like a beaten dog. There were moments when a better person than me might have felt sorry for him, but I was seeing the world through one eye, and his suffering made me happy. And when it came time for the Wild Hunt, and Abner was selected to be that week's steer, I spent an extra couple hours each day on the range practicing with the air rifle. I had to work real hard to learn how to shoot well with one eye patched up. Even then, I was never as good as I was back when I had two. But I figured Abner made for a bigger target than the pesky cans they had up in the range. On the day, I set off alone and hiked for 3 straight hours before I finally spotted him moving between the trees. Pale skin and shaved head, covered in bruises. Abner was a gaunt figure panting and running desperately through the undergrowth. Sounds dumb to say, but he looked like a deer. I swear it. Not in shape, but in spirit. The way he moved around looking so scared and alert. Dad and I had few shared interests, but deer hunting was one of them, and I knew the look plain as day. Made it easy to pull the trigger. The pneumatic whoomph of the air rifle was satisfying, but not as satisfying as the sound of the pellets striking him in the temple, and certainly not as satisfying as watching him practically tumble head over heels and go rolling down the side of the mountain. I was grinning when I crested the top and looked down, panting and laughing, all half mad, filled with the kind of righteous anger that I'm loath to admit I must have inherited from my father. But Jesus, when I finally saw him, when I saw the broken tangle of legs and arms, it made me think of a spider that's been stepped on. He was all bundled up, his violent descent down the hill stopped by the gnarled roots of a fallen tree. His face was streaked with blood and reminded me strangely of Jesus and his crown of thorns. And his eyes, his open eyes. Abner was looking at the sky too, just like Jesus with those chipped and painted irises. After that came the panic, and I don't remember much else. They found me half-collapsed a mile out from the camp, feverish with an infection that was racing from my eye to my brain. I'd soiled myself, and in my hysterical state, I told them about Abner. A terrible confession. They checked up on my story and found it to be true. 3 weeks later, I woke up in the hospital recovering from surgery to remove the infected eye. Dad was beside me and spoke in a tone that resembled pride. When he saw me looking nervously towards the door, he smiled and patted my shoulder. "Don't worry, we look after our own." The meat grinder is effective, I'll give them that. It took me a long time to realize that the people who ran that camp had plenty to lose too if my story got out. But the way they treated me, they acted like they were doing me a favor, saving me from an unfair and unjust world that would have persecuted me just for protecting myself. I never bought into it, not really. I don't know. I like to think I didn't do a great deal to actually help them. But whether I want to admit it or not, I became part of the machine. I was in videos, I was in brochures. I had tattoos that remain, even to this day, as blotchy scars across my chest and back. There are photos of me as a teenager that make me feel physically sick when I look at them. A gangly 19-year-old with an SS tattoo poking out from beneath my collar. These marks cost me educational and job opportunities, and that pushed me further into the machine. I went to rallies when they told me to, gave speeches when they told me to, threw bottles when they told me to. Eventually, they didn't have to keep telling me what to do. I was angry, so fucking angry, angry all the time, like a cancer of the mind. Do you want to know what ended it? What finally pulled me out? I was sent to jail for drunk and disorderly behavior when I was 21, and a young trans woman who was sharing the cell with me and 6 others looked my way. "You're a pretty man." And instinctively, I touched the scar on my face, the hollow socket that I never covered because I thought it made me look intimidating. But she only smiled. It was so gentle, like She knew the fear I'd felt when Abner had held me down. She made a kind gesture to a man with a swastika tattooed on his neck. She didn't have to show kindness to a man who wanted her dead. And then a thought came to me as clear as day. I don't think she deserves to die. After that, everything unraveled. For the last 20 years, my life has been dedicated to deprogramming people who got sucked up into the same machine I had. I've been on the news, interviewed for documentaries, lectured at every Ivy League university in the country. The charity I run has become my life's work, and every step of the way, I've received letters from people calling me a traitor. They'll say anything if they think it'll keep me quiet, but I just ignored them all. Only one set of letters came closer to rattling me. I always threw them away with the rest, but they had a habit of getting stuck in my thoughts for days afterwards. They were mean-spirited things that turned up in the strangest places. I found them in my fridge, in my shoes, in gym lockers. I saw them as nothing more than attempts to scare or bully me into silence. Most of them were simple, a few lines here and there. It hurt when you shot me. I confided in you. Something else found me in those woods. I figured they were sad attempts at intimidation, but if whoever was making them had any real guts, they would have reported the crime for what it was. But that was as likely to incriminate them as it would me. But then, a few months ago, one of the letters turned up in my car, and it shook me to my core. Reading the words within, it felt like I was out in those woods again, my heart racing and my stomach churning as I looked down at Abner's corpse. I was hard as a rock when I cut you. That's all there was on the page, but that's all I needed to see, because I never told anyone what I felt pressing down on my torso when Abner cut me. He never mentioned it in his letter either. The only people on this entire planet who'd know he had an erection were him and me. 3 days later, I got another letter. This one was inside the pillow on my bed. God only knows how it had gotten there, but by this point I felt as if my grip on reality was weakening. I hadn't been into work for weeks, hadn't seen any friends or family. When I read the final letter, I think I already knew what it wanted long before I actually saw the words. Eden waits. The sight of Eden's gates, downtrodden and collapsing beneath the weight of heavy woodland air, made the breath catch in my throat. In the 30 years since I'd last seen it, the forest had encroached on the abandoned grounds, and now the rotting cabins and algae-slick decks were hidden in shadows. In places, the buildings seemed to grow out of the woodland, their floors collapsing into the undergrowth as gnarled roots explored and reclaimed the foundations. Doors left ajar offered glimpses of rooms crowded with ferns as tall as me, their dripping fronds hiding fading posters with words like "Great Replacement" and "Skull Shapes Explained," barely visible in the dark. My feet navigated a loam floor that had half buried the long-forgotten remnants of camp life, including old VHS tapes of revisionist documentaries and rucksacks full of moldering clothes. In one cabin, there was even a flag still pinned by one corner to the wall. It looked like it had been used to put out a fire. Pressing deeper, I found a cabin with a half-charred timber frame. Dozens of jagged logs, planks, and even a few rusted iron beams had been jammed between the door and the wooden deck. Try as I might, I couldn't budge them, and the windows were thick with mud and filth. I never saw what lay inside, but I did note the gaping hole in the roof along with splintered planks that jutted outward. Stranger still, when I went down by the lake, I found 2 pickup trucks parked up beneath the canopy. Both had festered in the dank forest air, the rubber on their tires flaking and frail. And one, the airbag had deployed, but there was no sign of damage to the exterior. In the other, the door had been left open, and embedded in the passenger seat dash was a single human tooth. I didn't linger long in the camp. A cursory examination of my old cabin revealed nothing that caught my attention. Once I realized there were no real answers for me there, I set out for the woods. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't afraid as I took my first steps into the trees, but I couldn't have told you why. Only the feeling of eyes on my back. I think I kept at it because I wanted something bad to happen. I'd skirted justice for quite a long time. Sure, most nights I told myself I'd probably just imagined the whole thing, but so what? If I hadn't shot him, I would have, could have. Does it make that big a difference? I had it in me to kill, and my sins were so great that I don't think the distinction between what had or had not happened in those woods even mattered anymore. Sure, what he did to me was wrong, but I'd excused a lifetime of fuck-ups by saying I was just a kid. Difference was, I'd had time to grow and learn, while Abner had been robbed of that chance. I'd tried so hard to atone, but hurting him was the one thing I'd yet to face up to. I was scared of what I might find, but at least I didn't have to worry about getting lost. The ground sloped upwards for a few miles before the hill broke and went down at a sharp incline. All I had to do was find the crest and follow it one direction or the other. 50-50 I'd get it right the first time, and I had an instinct that if there was anything I needed to see, it would stand out to me. I don't know how familiar you might be with the woods, by the way. If you are, you'll already know just how quickly the horizon fades to darkness as it's lost to the ever-growing ranks of standing, leaning, and fallen trees. It's important you understand that, though, the darkness of it. It's like daytime is a bubble that only follows you. Everything farther than 20 or so feet away is in a perpetual dusk. A little farther than that, and it's as dark as any night. When I finally reached the top of the hill and looked down, I saw a mountainside disappearing into a wooded trench where the sun made little progress. It was like finding the border between day and night, and I had the strange realization that there must be places down amongst those trees where the sun might not have reached for thousands of years. I didn't have to walk far along the hilltop before I found the shoe. The red of its fabric laces was too bright for those woods. It lay just a dozen or so feet down the embankment like bait in a trap. But Jesus, did I hurry to take it. Why wouldn't I? In my memories of Abner lying dead, his left leg had bent backwards and reached all the way around to the top of his head like a scorpion tail. Dangling off the toe was a single shoe with red laces. Decades later, I was convinced I was looking at that very shoe. I rushed down the steep hill with great speed, my feet sinking into the soft and loamy woodland floor like I was descending a snowy bank. Each step covered 3 or so feet as I took these great loping strides, aided by gravity. When I slowed to grab the shoe, something beneath the leaves caught my foot, and I was sent careening towards the ground. I built up speed so quickly that my descent was closer to a free fall than a roll. The world became a dizzying swirl of canopy and dirt that only stopped when something hit me in the gut like a car hitting a wall. The world continued to spin around me, but that was just my inner ear failing to catch up with reality. I'd been stopped by a tree, and I lay half wrapped around it like a t-shirt on a clothesline. When I tried to breathe, something inside my chest grated and hurt so bad I worried I might die. Craning my neck and looking back up the hill, I saw an incline as steep as a cliff. Climbing back up would be no more possible than flying. For some reason, during my fall, I'd grabbed a hold of the shoe, and it was still clutched in one fist. I stuffed it in my bag and tried to take another deep breath to steady myself, but it was like someone had slid a knitting needle between my ribs. The pain was agonizing, and I could just about manage short, shallow breaths to keep my head from going light and dizzy. But it wasn't like I could stay there. All those thoughts of sin and punishment gave way to the fear that I might die in those woods. The way down would be difficult, but I could just about manage a slow crawl if I was careful. I rolled onto my stomach and got to grips with the soft earth, and then began my descent. But I was moving for only 10 minutes when I felt something strange beneath the leaves. It was another shoe. At first, I thought it must be the other one to Abner's, but the size was all wrong. It was barely as big as my hand, better fitted to one of the younger campers than a teen like Abner. Angry and hurt, I tossed it to the side and kept going, but I soon found myself pulling up a pair of moldy boxers. Then a t-shirt, a jacket, a sock, a scarf. I realized that the woodland floor was littered with the scattered belongings of what must have been dozens of people. But that was just the beginning. Before long, the leaves gave way and I was crawling over a carpet of old and discarded belongings. At times there were so many that I imagined myself emerging out of the sea and mounting a coastline made up of backpacks and clothes. There were tents, nets, gun bags, sleeping bags, coolers that had been smashed open. They couldn't all have come from Eden. Had they been tossed over the top of the hill? I was hours away from the nearest road. It wasn't like someone could have driven a dump truck up to that hill and emptied it. The more I tried to think of some rational explanation, the more the scale of the discarded old camping gear frightened me. I had no choice but to carry on downwards, but it was hard to swallow the growing sense that I was stumbling headfirst into a terrible, forgotten place. And then I found it. The uprooted tree. I felt like I'd just locked eyes with something terrible, like I'd gone to the fridge in the middle of the night and seen a face staring at me from the darkness beyond an open window. I couldn't even bring myself to breathe. Its gnarled and savage roots resembled a hand that clutched the darkness at the center of its knotty hollow. In all my wildest imaginings, I could not have fathomed that I would find the tree exactly as I'd remembered it. A specter plucked right from the nightmares that had plagued me every single day since I'd pulled the trigger. Once, when I was younger, I found an abandoned bear's den while hunting with my father. It was just a hole in the side of an embankment, its entrance littered with a scattering of small bones. The air around it stank of blood and meat after it's been shit out by an apex predator. Dad told me it was abandoned, but he still hurried me away with whispered gestures that let me know we weren't completely safe. The tree felt like that bear's den. They were both little things, but to the old instincts that lurk inside all living things, they were as big as the Grand Canyon. Enormous craters in reality condensed into tiny spaces like a black hole. I could not escape its gravity, and without thinking, I moved towards it, filled with the desperate urge to prove my nightmares wrong, to grip the smoothed roots and find nothing but wood and dirt. When I reached it, I knelt on an old plastic tent like they were pews and reached towards the hollow. I expected my fingers to sink into old mud gripped tight by long dead roots. Instead, I felt skin. It was cold, but soft. I snatched my hand away in disgust and terror, stumbling backwards and crying out. And Abner came into the light. Shaved head, pale eyes, the gaunt and angry frame of a teenage boy. One leg still bent agonizingly over the back of his head, an elbow where a neck should be, a mangled mess of joints and limbs that bent in ways they should not bend. The more of him that emerged, the less his body made sense. Instead of a torso, there was only bruised flesh the color of a sunset. A canvas of skin stretched thin by fractured bones that moved with a sound like creaking floorboards. His face was expressionless and tilted to the side as he gazed at me with pale and cloudy eyes. Nothing within those glassy orbs seemed to register my existence. Instead, when he finally recognized me, I think it was with some deeper, stranger instinct. Andrew. I rolled backwards and fled, but a broken rib can't be magicked away with adrenaline. I ran as far as I could before the pain lanced through me, and I hunched over into a 3-limbed crawl that quickly failed and sent me sprawling to the ground. When I turned back, the uprooted tree was a good 50 feet away. Andrew. He was looking up at me from within an old hiking shoe, a single cataract-riddled eye that searched blindly for my face. I screamed at the impossibility and launched myself into a loping crawl, but I couldn't see where I was going and stumbled headfirst into a tree. The crack of my skull was not loud, but it shot me through as a sudden, overwhelming nausea. My limbs turned to jelly, and I collapsed to the floor. I tried vomiting, but only a mouthful of thin acid came up, swimming briefly over my tongue before trickling down my cheek. Something in the woods found me. I opened my eyes and rolled over. Abner was there, an amoebal mass of knotted limbs with a shaved head for a nucleus, a nightmare bereft of all color. He must have been 30 feet across. The dozens of hands and feet that emerged and disappeared into his body defied easy categorization. Thumbs on thumbs, and toes and toes. Heels with palms, and hands with long canine arches. I felt like I was trying to make sense of something you'd find fermenting in an old specimen jar, squinting through thick glass at strange and veiny protrusions. Only Abner was not contained safely behind glass, but instead floated freely above me, his knuckled limbs waving gently like a girl's hair in pool water. A hand reached out towards me, but I couldn't contain my terror and shrieked as it came closer. In a mad scrabble, I began to drag myself backwards in a desperate attempt to escape the reach of a hand with a fractal's worth of digits. But Abner was in no hurry, and as I pulled myself the 20 or so feet to the foot of the hill, his arm kept moving forward like wool pulled from a ball of yarn. It kept pace even as I reached the start of the slope and tried to kick my way up it, but I couldn't get any purchase and managed only to climb a few feet before falling back to the ground. When this brought me closer to Abner's probing fingers, I sobbed and thrashed even harder at the loosely packed dirt and trash of the woodland floor. But that only made things worse, and I only made another foot up the hill before I fell once more, back towards the ground. This time, Abner's hand was so close I could smell him. Fungal growths and rotting meat. The dusty odor you ignore after opening an urn. The smell sent lightning coursing through my spine and limbs, and I was overcome by the kind of terror that blots out conscious thought. I would have crawled beneath the treads of a moving tank or slid headfirst into a wood chipper if it meant escaping this nightmare. It is so old, Andrew. Abner's voice paralyzed me. Have you ever seen educational videos on drowning? It's not splashing you're taught to look out for. People who are drowning are so close to death their nervous system nearly shuts down and they freeze in terror. Limbs locked, head held up high, legs straight and toes probing for the ground. Anything to avoid the rising water that's close to pouring down their open lips. Lying there, I felt a darkness rising up. Felt it flow over my toes, my feet, my ankles, my legs. A blanket of heavy black that flowed out of the spaces between the leaves and dirt below me, summoned by the dread in Abner's voice. It was born when the Great Lakes of America were filled with blood, and its tribe worshipped what swam in those waters. If anything of its humanity remains, it is a humanity that we could never recognize. Its idea of mercy is a flint axe to the base of an infant's skull. The only love it knows is forced and screaming in the dirt of a Neolithic breeding pit. The only humor it recognizes is the shrill braying of a crowd that watches flayed victims twitch in open air. I swear, I did not just hear his words, but I felt them. Their impact made it hard to breathe, and I felt like a man plunged into icy water. My gasps were short and shallow, and tinged with the terrifying knowledge that I would soon die. Yours was the only soul I could find while swimming, lost in the dark. A beacon of guilt, a thread that connects us. Now, you must help me. Whatever found me won't let me go. It binds us to our old things. The detritus that makes up this woodland floor is a sea of fetishes used to keep its victims in the dark. And mine. Andrew, you have mine. I can sense it. The shoe? Take it out of these woods. Put it in the sun and free me. The darkness filled my throat, and the last thing I remember as my consciousness faded was the realization that Abner did not look angry, but instead heartbroken and frightened. I need your help. When I came to, I was lying in an old bed too small for me, my feet dangling over the bottom. Overhead lay the ceiling of a once familiar cabin, the place I'd once slept as a teenager camper, now turned to rot and ruin. Fallen beams and a patchwork roof that let the rain strike my face in a gentle drizzle. Fear propped me up quickly, then pain nearly put me on my back again. Wincing, I lifted my damp clothing and saw a rainbow of bruises sprawling across the left side of my abdomen. Taking it slowly, I pushed myself to my feet and glanced at the crumbling ruins of what was once the Othala cabin where the boys aged 13 to 16 had bunked. It was raining, and great rivulets of water poured down the walls and cascaded through the open air. Outside, the sun was setting, and what little light made it into the camp's clearing was tinted pink and yellow. I limped to the nearest window and looked through an empty pane. In the fading light, the camp was a crowd of squat buildings lurking amongst the young growth of a healing forest, its pathways throttled by saplings and ferns, semi-hidden porches and walls furry with moss. My head was a mess, but I distinctly remembered falling and decided I must have hit my head in the woods. Abner and the rest was just a dream, surely. But then, who had rescued me after the fall? Squinting hard, I thought I could see someone moving around out there. Was that them? I cried out, a sad groan. Some part of me cringed at the suddenness of this sound. My instincts told me to lay low, crouch, hide. But I ignored them and cried out again, this time louder, clearer. Hello? A hand grabbed my ankle. A desperate figure pulled themselves out from beneath a nearby bed and gazed upwards at me. They had no eyes or jaw, but the wounds had been covered with smooth, pink skin. Lips led to teeth, led to palate and esophagus. Every breath seemed to leave them gagging on spittle and blood. This was not Abner, but like him, they were pale with a shaved head. Recoiling, I moved from the window and let some of the fading sunlight enter the cabin, and where the light hit the poor wretch's skin, their flesh simply ceased to exist, like a shadow. It must have hurt, because they cried out in pain and snatched their hand away, and I realized that with fingers so small, they couldn't have been older than 13. They retreated, but I soon discovered escape wouldn't be so easy. In the mere moments that had passed, the camp had already fallen further into darkness, and there were more figures moving in the shadows. Limping, drooling, crying, sobbing, naked, mutilated boys with scraggly, matted hair and starved figures. Dozens of them, hauling themselves out of the dark and stumbling blindly. A few had arms outstretched, looking for something in particular, but most shuffled, heads downturned. None of them were whole, missing arms, fingers. Jesus, one even had a hole going right through his chest. All of them were in pain. With every second that passed, the camp came alive and surrounded me with a waking nightmare. When two of the figures bumped into each other, their nature immediately changed. The sad whimpering of two lost souls was replaced with guttural rage as both erupted into violence. I've been in my fair share of fights, and I've never seen anything like it. Fistfights are rarely mortal affairs. You want to kill someone, you stab or shoot them. You don't try to clobber them to death with the ball of your palm. You don't use bitten nails to fishhook a hole right through their cheek. You don't tear at their jugular with your few remaining teeth. It didn't just happen once, either. Each time two or more of those figures bumped into each other, the violence appeared like a switch getting flicked. But the worst part was that once the fight was over and the loser had stopped thrashing violently on the ground, they would both just get back up. Injuries dripping black fluid, but quickly sealing with new skin. I saw one boy smash another's head in with a rock, and when his victim sat upright, he had nothing left of his skull above the nose. His teeth chattered briefly, and then he stood up and kept walking. My only hope was the light. Each time one of those things stood in the sun, they disappeared. It was as if they were made of shadow, only able to exist as long as they were not exposed to direct light. It was a risk, but I had to hope it wasn't just the sun they feared. I had a flashlight in my pocket, and I grabbed it, but as soon as my hand made contact, something outside squealed like a stuck pig. The instant I heard it, it was like being plunged into cold water. The atmosphere in the bunk and camp outside immediately changed, and I turned to see that the army of dark figures now stared at me. Panicked and afraid, I fumbled briefly before turning on the light and pivoted just in time to catch something leaping at me from beneath the dark. They faded to nothing in the light, but then something else in the periphery moved, and when I turned towards them, the previous attacker returned to existence. I was forced to flick the light desperately from one to the other just to keep the two at bay. Terrified, I tried to calm myself and think of some way to escape, but there was no time. From behind, there came the sound of tinkling glass, and then hands so cold they left freezer burns on my skin dragged me through the open window. I screamed, but did not let the flashlight go. As I was thrown to the floor, I saw a nightmarish mob surround me. They laughed and sneered as a knee pushed me into the sodden mud. I felt it then. That same fear I had decades before, the eyes staring down at me. This was a familiar violence. But then there came another nails-on-chalkboard shriek, the kind of gut-wrenching wail that had to belong to a monster. My attackers reacted like sullen schoolboys, clenched teeth and flared nostrils suddenly replaced with downturned eyes and sniffling noses. They parted reluctantly, and I saw it. Him. He crawled towards me, a small figure, lithe, no more than 5 feet tall, dense muscle and a potbelly, a mane of hair that nearly touched the ground. He was the color of oil. No detail except a silhouette, a figure made of shadow. He grunted and sniffed the air like a dog. He smelled of copper and violence. His presence was as heavy as dark matter. I swear, the only other things like him are swirling around supercolliders in Switzerland. And when he touched me, I saw the world. The real world, onto which ours is only a painted image. An ocean with no bottom. An ecosystem with no ceiling, only ever-growing predators, some large enough to engulf stars. I learned some of his memories. He learned some of mine. I felt the vague imprint of wisdom earned over 100,000 years. Foul sorcery that might make a kind of twisted sense to a modern scientist. But for me to try to grasp any of it, even some of it, made me feel like I was at risk of dislocating something in my mind, some joint or hinge that, once loose, could never be popped back into place. I shied away from it, and when I opened my eyes, that monster's hand was touching the place where my eye used to be. And it was smiling. A vile sight, rich with cruelty and malice. The grin of a murderer dying peacefully in old age. That smile spoke to me. It told me that the modern world had been of no interest to this forgotten creature, or so it had thought. But as it scraped Abner's mind of every memory he had, it learned of Eden and found echoes of the world it had once been fond of. It had been so long since it had had so many people to play with. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. This thing only had one eye. It knew what Abner had done to me, and it knew what I had done to Abner. The grin widened, and a hand made of the darkness between atoms clamped around my head. When I awoke, I was in my car. Morning had broken, and my chest was painted with dappled light. I wasted no time in trying to remember what was or wasn't real. I had somehow traveled halfway down the trail, a good 2 days' hike, and was back near the road. Escape was in sight, and I took it. I drove so fast I nearly came off the dirt road on more than one occasion. Kept going, barreling down the mountain until some part of me remembered the broken rib. At some point, the pneumonia got the better of me. I must have passed out and the car rolled to a stop. The park ranger who found me said I had a hell of a fever, and it put me in the hospital for the next few weeks. I spent my time rambling at doctors about a darkness so heavy it could drown the sun, like an ocean drowns a candle. It's been about a year since then. Not a day's gone by I haven't thought about Abner, or the thing that holds him captive. That smile. Sometimes I still see it, leering at me from the dark spaces, beneath the tablecloth at a busy restaurant, the dumpster in an alley. One time, a homeless man asked for change, and a single eye stared out at me from his open mouth. It's taunting me. It took Abner's shoe, and it intends to keep him. It thinks it knows me well enough that I won't go back to help him and the others. The mountain of trash at the foot of the hill. How long has it been up there collecting hikers and campers? Anyone unlucky enough to stumble into the dark places of Appalachia where the sun has not shone for millennia. I know why it let me go. For Abner to have come so close to escape, for him to know that he nearly got out and to spend eternity wondering if I might one day return, that would amuse it. And that's why it let me go. The thought that I might risk my own neck to help the boy who cut out my eye, it couldn't fathom such a thing. Thinks that I'll scurry away like a rabbit freed from a trap. it's wrong. I suspect I won't have it so easy next time. That thing is smart. Smart enough to have been born mortal, but still live 500,000 years later. Smart like evolution, like nature. Kind of thing like that can be hard for a human to reckon with. And I think there's a good chance that I'll lose the next confrontation. Lose it badly. But I'm no slouch either. I've fought my share of hatred, and I've got my own plans for how to help the people stuck in Eden. A truck with a generator, floodlights, glow sticks, a quad bike so expensive it could damn near drive up Everest, homemade napalm, enough to burn a mountain to the ground. When I go back, I'm bringing the light with me. You've been listening to Eden by Christian Wallace. Christian Wallace is a PhD student and writer hailing from rain-soaked Wales, where he grew up comforted by ancient castles, crumbling coastlines, and the old things that live in the woods. You can find more of his stories at chwallis.co.uk and at Velix Books. There's a lot that I'd like to say about this story, far more than I have time to cover in this outro segment. I love the imagery of broken, angry forms fighting amongst themselves at the slightest provocation. I love the depiction of how loneliness and the need for acceptance are so frequently the root of hatred. But most of all, I love that a single man can make a difference, and that the journey down the road of redemption is so frequently begun with an act of kindness. You all don't listen to this show to hear me preach, and I'm not going to start now. But I will close out this episode with a request. As you go about your lives, interacting with people both known and unknown, remember that many are fighting the same battles that you are and want the same things out of life. It's easy to assume the worst in folks, but there are those out there that want you to feel that way, that are doing their best to make you feel that way, and who delight in division and strife. So, when you go about your life, instead of bringing the hatred that others have done their best to saddle you with, instead, bring some light with you. Thanks again to Christian Wallace for this amazing story. Tune in next week for more Horror Hill, and until then, stay spooky, friends. You've been listening to the Horror Hill Podcast, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Tonight's episode was hosted, narrated, scored, and finalized by yours truly, Eric Peabody. Additional music by Nikki McSorley. Got a terrifying tale of your own that you'd like performed? Email it to us at submissions@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your work considered for future production. Note that any writing utilizing artificial intelligence is ineligible. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, why not help us spread our dark presence online? You can follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on social media, and upvote, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you're listening to this on YouTube. It helps us out a lot and also keeps you up to date on new episodes. If you'd like access to uninterrupted horror, free of ads and these annoying bookend segments, might I recommend signing up to be a patron? You'll get access to hundreds of episodes of this show, as well as everything from the other programs in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights cabal. That means all of Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Drew Blood's Dark Tales, and more. It's a veritable smorgasbord of horrific delights. Head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to get started. If you're looking for someone to narrate or handle audio production for your own personal project, I just so happen to know a guy. Email me at ericpeabodyvoice@gmail.com. That's ErikPeabodyvoice@gmail.com, and we can talk details. If darkness is what you're after, listener, your search is over. Yet, let it be known, You haven't found the darkness. The darkness has found you.
Chilling tales for dark nights. Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Out back, the shed stood crooked. Cracked patches of mud marked the paving stone pathway that once ran the length of the lawn, laid in a haphazard zigzag by a gardener trying too hard to add character to a lopsided garden parched beyond saving. The shed door, long shrunk out of shape by a lifetime of turbulent British weather, hung by a single hinge and remained shut, not locked, just shut. There was no window. From the gaps between the slats that comprised the door, gaps that were narrow in places, wider in others, escaped only inkblot like threads of darkness, and nothing more. Whenever we'd wondered what was behind that shut-to, not locked, wooden door, which he did so lots of times, Nathan had asked his grandmother what she kept in the shed. Somehow she'd always answer without answering, if that made any kind of sense. She'd mumble something or other about noisy little boys and their inevitable comeuppance, usually just enough to start the cogs of his imagination turning, his attention shifting onto a new fancy, as little boys' imaginations tended to do, and then, without him noticing, his curiosity about the shed would vanish. Then, before he could pluck up the courage to interrupt his grandmother from her chores for a second or third time, it would be time to go home. Nathan's grandmother was an expert on avoiding the subject of what was in the shed at the bottom of the garden. Nathan was just a little boy, struggling to understand the world and its perpetual fascination with misdirecting the young. He had no hope of ever getting his grandmother to admit to the truth. But children are quick to learn from their environment, and realizing the futility of asking his grandmother the same question again, Nathan had taken his first tentative steps into mastering the art of deception. Knowing she kept a tidy house, he told her he'd seen a mouse scuttle across the kitchen flags and disappear somewhere inside the larder. Upon hearing this, his grandmother had spent the last 10 minutes on her hands and knees, torch in one hand, dustpan in the other, cursing her ill fortune. 10 minutes was more than enough time for Nathan to sneak out of the house and creep down to the shed at the bottom of the garden. Now he stood nose to door, one eye squeezed shut, the other peering through a gap in the wood into the murk beyond, his courage rising, falling, then rising again, his palms sweaty, his heart thudding against the inside of his rib cage. Squeezing his fingertips between the door and its frame, he gently pried it open. It shuddered free, showering him in dust. He glanced nervously back toward his grandmother's house, half expecting to see her marching towards him, skirt hitched, cheeks puffing, scolding between hurried breaths. But the garden was empty. She was still caught amid his deceit. His attention shifted back to the shed and its contents, of which there were none, except for a set of worn stone steps that led down into anonymous gloom. Nathan stood at the top of the steps and peered into the darkness beneath him. The steps descended deeper than he was able to see. He called out, not expecting to be answered, hearing only his greeting reply in echo. With his curiosity mounting, he placed his left foot onto the first of the stone steps. Aside from a creeping cold that permeated the sole of his shoe, all remained right with the world. Nothing had stirred in the gloom below. The monsters that in his mind had waited for this moment to pounce either slept undisturbed or lurked imagined. Deciding that he'd likely not get a chance to explore the steps and their destination any time soon again, as his grandmother would surely keep him close by, once she discovered he'd been inside her shed, he took a deep breath and set off down the steps. After the first 80 or so steps Nathan had counted, the low, arched passageway that had been neatly carved through the soil and rock fell away on all sides into perfect darkness, taking with it the damp earthen smell that had polluted his nostrils. At first he stood still and unsteady, sure that to either side of him lay a drop so deep he'd likely die before hitting the bottom. Continuing down, his footfalls echoed with a decreasing resonance, causing his trailing footsteps to layer over one another, building into a frantic crescendo that battered his eardrums and rattled his teeth before ceasing abruptly, replaced by absolute silence. The unknown enormity of the cavern threatened his balance once more, and he was about to give up on his expedition when he caught sight of a glimmer of light far below. He continued his descent. For hours he walked, maybe days. It was hard for him to gauge the passage of time in silence in the abyss. Still, the light below him, distorted and orange, like it was viewed through a grease-smudged lens, drew nearer, and it was impossible to tell whether it was Nathan who approached the light or if the light approached Nathan. Down, further, deeper. The distant flicker of light became a vertical streak that burned with increasing intensity and grew longer, grew taller with every step taken, deeper still, until he stood at the bottom of the stone staircase. Before him, a wall of sheetrock, split cleanly in two by a searing streak of orange light, and he had to crane his neck forward as far as he was able, and still he could not see an end to the light that burned without heat a mere arm's length from him. To his right, something shifted in the murk, formless, yet quickly settling on a shape it deemed least offensive. The shadows shifted and parted to reveal the frayed outline of a man, slender and tall, taller than any man Nathan had seen. He was older, too. His features were gaunt and crisscrossed, with deep lines, each an abyss unto itself. His eyes were narrow, corrupted by eternal night. "You should not be here, little one," said the gatekeeper, his lips forming a practiced grimace, his teeth needle-sharp. "Far from the light you have strayed." With his initial surprise at the presence of the man subsiding, Nathan spoke. "Don't tell Nana, will you? I just wanted to see what she kept in her shed." The gatekeeper's grimace stretched into a grin as a trickle of pleasure stirred deep within the bowels of the form's impersonation of a gut. This one was young, his soul untainted, a rare delicacy, but he was untouchable, for the ways of free will had yet to assert their influence. "You want to be careful how you handle the truth, little one. Truth is a gift, delicate, easily mislaid. Beyond it only lies and sin." "Well, lies are bad," chirped Nathan, squinting at the light erupting from the rock face. "That's what Mum says." "Your mother is wise to the ways of the world," said the gatekeeper, nonchalantly seeking an internal record as to the current state of her soul. "Alas," he sighed, "she is destined for that other place." His eyes narrowed further, the wrinkled features of his face swallowing them momentarily. "You should heed her words, lest I devour your soul." "What's your favorite color?" asked the boy. the rubescent spray of arterial blood. Mine's blue. What's your favorite food? Charred flesh, or muscle, raw and bleeding, peeled from the bone. I like pizza best. What's your favorite TV show? I have no interest in the puerile distractions of the living. I savor their anguish, a feast on their pain. Mine's Ben 10. It has aliens in it. Another blasphemy. Perhaps he shall be damned in time. You ask a lot of questions, growled the gatekeeper, his torment rising. Nathan pointed toward the light. Where's that wall got a light in it? The gatekeeper was accustomed to frequent visitors, but not of the sort that wished to stay a while and chat. Amused by his guest's apparent fearlessness, and bored beyond the realms of mortal tedium, the gatekeeper suppressed his agony, brought his skeletal hands together in mock prayer, and spoke. "'Tis not a wall as such. Earth, comprised of rock and dirt, merely shapes the gateway to one of the two realms." Nathan blinked at the man and returned his arm to his side. "Think of it as a door," hissed the gatekeeper. Nathan craned his neck again. "It's a very big door." The gatekeeper nodded. A moment of silence followed as Nathan mulled over whether to ask his next question. "What's in there?" The gatekeeper smiled. "Heat and darkness, despair and pain. It is not a place for the likes of you." "Who's it for, then?" "The worthless and the damned." Nathan put his hands into his pockets and looked at the floor. "Is my daddy in there?" The gatekeeper knew that he was not, and watched as the boy shuffled his weight from one foot to the other. "'Cause my mommy said he was worthless." Humor was oft lost on lesser demons, but the gatekeeper was sufficiently versed in the ways of the living, and he allowed himself an attempt at a laugh. The sound that escaped the lips of the old man, guttural and impossibly loud, caused Nathan to jump. The gatekeeper noted the boy's discomfort. "Forgive me, my child. Your father is not here, nor is he in that other place, although that is where he will surely be once the time comes." The gatekeeper glanced past the boy, noting the shuffling presence that was lamenting itself down the final few stone steps. He ushered the boy aside, content that he would see nothing of the horror about to unfold. His light shall be barrier enough. First came the murderer, his clothes slicked with the blood, his body cut, his wounds deep, matching those of his victim who now existed, free of pain in a place of incomprehensible beauty. After him the adulteress, her genitals exposed as a heaving mass of pulsing blisters, her lying tongue lolling between her sagging breasts. Behind her lumbered the gluttonous, an individual whose greed caused excessive misery to others, his body impossibly swollen, so that his hands and feet were all but stumps attached to a heaving, sweating mass of blubber, his eyes bulging from a face swollen by fat. They ignored the boy and his light, either oblivious to his presence or too consumed by confusion and fear to pay him heed. The gatekeeper had heard their pitiful cries long before his interaction with the boy had begun. Only now had they completed the journey down the steps of woe to arrive at the gateway to hell. In his experience, some took longer to make the descent than others. The will to flee the inescapable pull of the damned varied person to person. The plays were in vain, heard already, 100,000,000 times before, often from souls far more deserving of forgiveness not found. Such an ugly concept. The gatekeeper shuddered at the idea. The mere thought of the word caused searing pain to permeate his essence, and He screamed in agony. Nathan jumped a second time. He could see that the old man was distracted by something, but was unsure as to what. Aside from a sudden chill that made him long for his blue winter jacket, everything was as it had been. The old man's mouth began to move, and his face twisted as to become almost unrecognizable, his features lost amid a mask of flesh that seemed to tear, and the gatekeeper, suddenly aware of his guest, looked at the boy, noting his rising fear. The rage of the 1,200 fallen souls subsided momentarily, and he quashed his anger, securing the form of the old man once more. The boy looked to be relieved, cold, but relieved. I shall hurry the damnation. The gatekeeper eyed the 3 pitiful souls kneeling and wailing before him. Without a word, without motion, he commanded the gates. The light emanating from the wall of rock intensified as the gates swung open, deliberate and slow, their size beyond massive, teasing an ever-expanding glimpse as to the torment below. Nathan watched, mouth agape, as the wall of rock parted soundlessly, the light too bright for him to look upon, and he turned away, not afraid, but somehow knowing this was not a sight for him. The anguished cacophony of the accursed burst forth from beyond the gates, swallowing the pathetic cries of the 3 sinners kneeling before the gatekeeper, consuming their twisted forms, accepting them among the chorus of the condemned. With a deft motion, the gates slammed together, silencing the infernal din. Darkness settled upon the cavern once more. Only the smudged streak of light that marked the seam between the gates remained. Nathan, shielded by his innocence, saw and heard nothing beyond the gates. He stood confused, waiting patiently for the attention of the gatekeeper to return to him once more. "What's your name?" asked the boy. To pronounce it correctly, I'd need to open your throat and pull your tongue through your bloody slit. "You may address me as Moloch." "That's a funny name," laughed the boy. "Mine's Nathan." "Nathan, I know who you are," interrupted Moloch, extending a bony finger. "I also know you should not be here, yet you remain. What are you doing down here all alone?" "Moloch, down here is where I belong. I serve the fallen Lord. These gates I tend, allowing in only those judged as sinners. My vigil is timeless. Those behind the gates must remain behind the gates. That is my sworn duty. Don't you get lonely?" The wrinkles in Moloch's assumed brow deepened, seemingly swallowing traces of what little light escaped the seam of the gates. Loneliness was a mortal condition. He was created to serve a purpose. Beyond that, there was nothing of interest or concern to him. Such was the order of hell. "No, I do not." The sound of distant footfalls and trembling voices caused Moloch to look up. Another sinner approached. "You should return to your home, Nathan. I have much to attend to." Nathan turned to follow Moloch's gaze and saw only the stone steps, empty and ending in darkness. "I probably should," began Moloch. "Nanny will be worried. It's been ages. There are lots of steps." "Do not worry. You will emerge from this place the moment you entered. Time holds no sway here." Nathan frowned. "That is to say," continued Moloch, "that your grandmother will not have noticed your absence." "Thank you, Moloch," said Nathan with a smile. "This has been fun." "I'm sure it has," grinned Moloch. "But do not come back." As he watched the small boy gingerly pick his way up the stone steps, passing through the gathering crowd of thieves, rapists, and heretics who stumbled over one another in a bid to plead for mercy first, Moloch wondered as to the nature of evil. It was evident that the boy, who had turned to wave his way a final time, held no capacity for evil, and that Moloch would likely never meet him again. He hoped he would not meet him again, as much as any demon had the capacity to hope, for there was still time for the boy to lose his way. The curse of free will claimed many an innocent soul as they embarked on the torrid journey the mortals referred to as life. As he watched the shadows consume the outline of the boy, it was a strange and uncomfortable feeling that manifested in his makeshift gut, one that he was only too glad to be rid of once he shed his form. From the shadows, Moloch glared at Nathan and the approaching girl. She, not much older than he, and like he, a stranger to this place both in life and death. "I told you not to return," said Moloch, stepping out of the gloom and staring at the girl. "See, I told you there's an old man living down here," gloated Nathan. "She didn't believe me." "I did believe you," countered the girl. "I just wanted to see for myself." Moloch grinned. "Girl, if sight is needed as proof, so that one may believe, you may well find yourself back here sooner than you like." "Oh, I don't think so," shrugged the girl. "It smells funny down here, like rotten eggs." "That's my big sister, Bethany," said Nathan. "She wanted to meet you." "Do you want to see my verruca?" said Bethany, kicking off his shoe and bending to remove her sock. "Oh, I enjoy the sight of festering flesh as much as any," hissed Moloch, his temper rising. "But one pus-filled sore looks much the same as any other, so—" Bethany lifted her foot and pointed it towards the gatekeeper. "The doctor said he'd never seen one as big as this." "It's quite the sight," said Moloch, averting his gaze from the girl's infected foot, instead focusing on the stone steps, hoping, nay, praying, for the welcome distraction of new intake of sinners. "She's got an even bigger one on her other foot," said Nathan. "Go on, show him." As the girl began to slide her foot from the remaining shoe, the final fragile strands of Moloch's restraint, a display of self-control that at any other time would have earned him a place in that other kingdom, snapped. The children had to leave and never return. With a growl born of timeless rage, Moloch shed the threads of his assumed disguise and allowed himself to metamorphosize into his true, demonic form. The children stood rooted, mouth agape, bodies trembling, a silent scream escaping their lips as the flesh of the old man split and tore, his limbs twisted and snapped, and all hint of the gatekeeper's human form was swallowed by a revolting mass of pulsing meat and blood. From its rear burst two spindly appendages, sending a shower of blood mist into the air, covering the faces of the children. From these appendages unfurled sheets of wet flesh, which flapped in unison and expanded in size until their span was reached. The grotesque mask, now a winged, writhing hulk of muscle, twisted and contorted, its center tearing in two, revealing a snapping mouth lined with rows of pointed broken teeth. A tongue, long and neatly split, danced this way and that, edging closer to the children who were still gripped by their catatonic state. Above the mouth, a single eye open, bulbous, vast, and emanating hate. Their shock shattered by terror, the children turned and ran. They did not look back. "Tell your grandmother to buy a lock for that door," roared Moloch, relishing the freedom of his true form. "And next time I see you, I'll peel the flesh from your face." Out back, the shed stood crooked and secured with several gleaming padlocks. It remained empty inside, save for the stone steps that led down deep into the earth crust. At the foot of the steps remained the gatekeeper, whom, in those lingering silences when he might relax his guard, did wonder as to the joys of a setting sun, a clear night sky, a soft kiss of falling snow, and to the well-being of the two children. The feeling in his makeshift gut had lingered on, gaining in ferocity since he'd been forced to frighten them away. It was a feeling the mortals had termed regret. He didn't much care for it. On the last step before the gates of hell sat a solitary, crumpled white sock and a pair of scuffed black school shoes. Moloch could have swept them into the abyss, but in those same long, lingering silences, they reminded him that there was good in the world. It was just that he would never likely see it again firsthand. Beside which, the sight of the shoes provided many wretched souls with a welcome, albeit puzzling, distraction, and in his few lighter moments, he'd shared the story of their origin with a select few, while they waited to begin their sentence of eternal agony.
Chilling tales for dark nights. Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, and welcome to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm your host this evening, Nicholas Goroff, once again filling in for Steve Taylor, who will be back next week. Tonight's story begins the way many nightmares do. Quietly. A failed marriage, a lost job, an apartment that no longer feels like home. And then, a name appears. A therapist no one remembers recommending. An office tucked away in a building where no one else seems to work. A man who speaks gently about control being an illusion and chaos being the path to freedom. What begins as grief spirals into something far more unsettling, with the horrifying realization that some guides don't want to heal you. They want to replace you. Settle in and dim the lights. The show is about to begin. Before we get to tonight's feature, however, we'd like to thank our dedicated supporters in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights patrons area. For just $7.99 per month, members receive ad-free listening, early access to new episodes, exclusive content, and our complete archive, with discounted annual options available as well. Your support helps us continue producing the immersive horror experiences you've come to expect, week after week. To learn more or become a member, visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com. Thank you for helping us bring nightmares to life, month after month. Originally appearing on Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Season 16, Episode 12, on December 15th, 2024, tonight's tale is performed by Malcolm Blackwood, the hell-raising host of that very podcast, with production by Aaron Sawicki. And now, without further delay, I present to you from author N.M. Brown, Chaos Beneath the Stars.
My life fell apart fast. One minute I was going through the motions day by day, then it all came crashing down. The divorce hit first. Marie had been distant for a while. If I'm honest, she'd been pulling back for months. Her weekends full of friend trips and work obligations. I tried not to see it, to just keep going. And then one night, I came home to a note on the kitchen counter. She didn't love me anymore, she said. Simple as that. At first, I thought I'd misunderstood. I read the note 3 times, holding it under the kitchen light, searching for some clue that this wasn't real. But it was plain as day, and there was no ambiguity in the careful way she'd written it. No fights, no long discussions, just her absence and those final words scrawled on cheap paper. The apartment, already quiet, became a tomb. Her toothbrush was gone, her half-empty mug wasn't on the counter anymore, and her favorite blanket didn't slump over the arm of the couch. It wasn't just the things she took, it was the way her absence rewrote the space. Every room felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out. I started sleeping on the couch because the bed didn't feel like mine anymore. Even the sound of silence changed. At night, it pressed against my ears, ringing faintly, as if trying to remind me that she wasn't there. Sometimes, I thought I could still hear her humming in the kitchen, or the faint creak of her footsteps in the hall. But, of course, when I turned my head, it was just the same empty apartment. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts followed me. Marie's absence was a hole I couldn't avoid falling into. My boss, Dan, called me into his office one afternoon. He said something about needing focus, but his tone made it clear he'd noticed the drop in my performance. I nodded and promised I'd pull it together. I even believed it when I said it. 2 months later, the promise didn't matter. The company was restructuring, they said. A group of executives from corporate came down and told us they'd been forced to make some tough decisions. They called it right-sizing, a phrase that sounded like a dull knife being drawn across a whetstone. By noon, half the office had packed their things and walked out. My box was sitting on my desk before I even had a chance to sit down. I made the drive home with the same sense of dread I'd had the day Marie left. My hands clutched the steering wheel like a lifeline. The world outside the car felt too big, too chaotic. I kept glancing at the empty passenger seat. Marie's coat used to hang there, the one with the small tear on the sleeve she kept promising to fix. Now, there was nothing but the faint imprint of where she'd sat, weeks ago, on the last ride we'd taken together. The box of desk supplies ended up next to the front door. I didn't bother unpacking it. I couldn't remember the last time I'd even cared about the things inside. Instead, I sank onto the couch and stared at the TV. I didn't turn it on, I just let the darkness of the screen reflect the hollow space around me. The days after that blurred together. I'd wake up late, not because I felt rested, but because there wasn't anything waiting for me. The bed remained unmade, the dishes piled up in the sink, and the mail gathered in a sad, unopened stack near the door. I stopped answering calls. Dan left a voicemail the day after the layoffs, something about networking or references. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Outside, the world kept moving, but it felt like I was standing still. The idea of stepping out of my apartment, walking through the city, being seen, it filled me with this inexplicable dread. Whenever I worked up the courage to go to the store or grab coffee, I felt exposed, like every set of eyes turned my way could see just how far I'd fallen. The city seemed colder, harder. Shadows lingered in the alleys, even in the brightest parts of the day. I started ordering delivery just to avoid leaving completely. At night, sleep offered no comfort. Dreams came in fragmented bursts, flickering like static on a broken screen. I'd see images of Marie, but her face was always turned away, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't reach her. Sometimes, I'd dream I was back at work, But the office was strange, warped somehow. Its corners stretched too far, and the windows looked out onto nothing but darkness. I'd wake up gasping, the phantom echoes of her voice or Dan's fading into the stillness of the room. That stillness, it grew louder the longer I stayed alone. There were moments when I thought I heard faint whispers. I'd be sitting on the couch, staring into the empty living room, and the air would shift just slightly, like someone was breathing in the corner of the room, just out of sight. Other times, I'd feel the hair on the back of my neck rise, as if unseen eyes were watching me. My rational mind told me it was just the stress, the isolation playing tricks on me, but it didn't make it easier to sleep. The only time I felt remotely grounded was when I started cleaning. It didn't happen often, but on the rare occasions when I'd pick up the dishes or fold laundry, I'd feel like I was clawing back a tiny piece of myself. It didn't last long. By the next morning, the apartment would look just as hollow and lifeless as before. One night, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own reflection. My face looked thinner, paler, with dark circles under my eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. But it wasn't just the exhaustion. I could swear my reflection wasn't moving quite right. I'd tilt my head, and the image in the mirror would follow just a half-second too late. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me step back from the sink, heart pounding. I told myself it was the lack of sleep, the stress, but the feeling lingered. It was during one of those nights, sitting awake on the couch with the TV off and the shadows feeling heavier than usual, that I realized I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to talk to someone, to get help, anything to make this crushing, endless cycle stop. I don't remember exactly how I found him, Dr. Thalen Pryatt. The name felt familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. I couldn't recall anyone recommending him, yet there it was, his name scribbled on a scrap of paper I didn't remember writing on. It felt like it had appeared when I needed it most. The next morning, I called the number, and the receptionist scheduled me for an appointment later that week. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, as if she already knew exactly why I'd called. That's how I ended up standing in front of his office door, tucked away in a quiet building on the edge of the city. The gold letters on the frosted glass were small and unassuming. Dr. Thalen Pryatt, Counselor. For a moment I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I almost turned back, but something about the stillness of the hallway pushed me forward. When I stepped inside, I felt the faintest sense of relief. The waiting room was plain, almost clinical, with beige walls and a small potted plant in the corner. There were no other patients waiting, no sound except the faint hum of a desk fan. Before I could sit, the door to his office opened, and a tall man with sharp features stepped out. "Elliot," he said, his voice smooth and even. "Come in." Dr. Pryatt was tall, not in an exaggerated way, just enough to make you notice. His features were sharp, his cheekbones pronounced, and his dark hair combed neatly back. He moved with an unsettling kind of precision, like someone who never second-guessed a step in his life. His eyes, though, they were the kind of dark that didn't reflect light. They stayed on me a moment too long. The way he said my name gave me pause, like it wasn't the first time he'd said it. I followed him into his office anyway. The room was sparse, almost clinical. A single leather chair sat across from his desk, which was empty except for a notepad and a pen placed exactly in the center. The walls were bare, except for a clock that ticked just slightly too loudly. There was no sign of personal touches, no family photos, no degrees, not even the usual bookshelf cluttered with dusty psychology textbooks. It felt like a space that didn't belong to anyone, least of all the man sitting behind the desk. Dr. Pryatt gestured for me to sit. I hesitated for half a second, then dropped into the chair. My knees felt uncomfortably close to his desk. "So, Elliot," he began, folding his hands neatly in front of him, "what brought you here today?" I faltered, unsure of where to start. I guess I just feel like I've lost control of everything," I said finally. "My wife left, my job's gone, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing anymore." He nodded, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. "You've been through significant upheaval," he said. "That kind of disruption often leaves us questioning our place in the world." I wasn't sure what I had expected him to say. Maybe something more reassuring, something that didn't sound like an obituary for my life. But he didn't elaborate, didn't rush to fill the silence. He just waited, his dark eyes fixed on me like he was studying something beneath my skin. "I don't know how to fix it," I admitted. "It's like I'm stuck. I can't move forward, and everything I try just doesn't work." Dr. Pryatt leaned forward slightly. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the problem isn't that you're stuck. Perhaps it's that you're resisting the natural course of things." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Control," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We all cling to it, especially when our lives feel chaotic. But the truth is, control is an illusion. Chaos is what shapes us. Sometimes the best thing we can do is lean into it." His words unsettled me, though I couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the way he said them, like he wasn't offering advice but stating an undeniable fact. Still, there was something in his tone, something almost comforting, like he understood a part of me I hadn't even shared yet. We talked for nearly an hour, or rather, I talked. He didn't say much, only asking a few pointed questions that had a way of pulling more out of me than I expected. By the time I left, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd shed some of the weight I'd been carrying since Marie left. As I stepped back into the waiting room, I paused. For the first time, I realized how empty the space was. No receptionist, no ambient noise, not even the faint hum of a computer or phone. Just silence. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe he worked alone. Plenty of therapists did. The drive home felt different. The city, which had seemed so foreign and oppressive for weeks, looked almost normal again. I didn't feel that cloying sense of dread I'd been carrying with me everywhere. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I'd found something or someone that could help. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The dreams came, but they didn't feel as sharp, as jagged. They were strange, sure, flashes of indistinct faces and shadowed hallways that stretched on forever. But I didn't wake up gasping. I didn't wake up at all until the sun was creeping through the blinds. That felt like progress. Over the next few days, I found myself feeling lighter. Not happy, not yet, but less burdened. I cleaned up the apartment, made a grocery run, even called an old friend just to talk. The conversation was awkward and stilted, but it felt like I was clawing my way back to something normal. I scheduled another session with Dr. Pryatt. The second time I walked into Dr. Pryatt's office, it felt less daunting. The silence of the waiting room didn't weigh on me the way it had before. It almost felt familiar, like stepping into a quiet sanctuary. He was waiting for me, standing in the doorway to his office with that same calm, unreadable expression. "Elliot," he said, gesturing me in, "it's good to see you again." I sat in the same chair, and we began. This time his questions were more precise, cutting closer to things I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding. When I mentioned Marie, my voice cracked unexpectedly. I hadn't talked about her with anyone since she'd left. "I just keep replaying everything in my head," I admitted. "Every argument, every little mistake. I feel like if I'd just done something differently, been better somehow, she wouldn't have left." Dr. Pryatt studied me, his hands folded neatly on the desk. "Regret is a powerful thing," he said. "It has a way of tethering us to the past, convincing us we could have changed it. But what if regret wasn't something to avoid? What if it was a guide?" I blinked. "A guide?" He nodded. "Regret points to the things we value most. If you lean into it, face it fully, you may find that it holds the answers you're looking for." The way he said it made sense, in a strange, unsettling way. For the first time, I let myself think about Marie without trying to shove the feelings aside. The guilt, the sadness, the anger, they were all still there, but something about acknowledging them made them feel less suffocating. By the end of the session, I felt drained but oddly hopeful. Dr. Pryatt didn't offer reassurances or solutions, but his words lingered with me. It felt like I'd been given permission to stop running from myself. That night, I slept deeply. The dreams still came, fragmented and strange, but they didn't leave me gasping when I woke. I felt like I'd cracked open some part of myself that had been sealed off for too long. Over the next few days, I started to rebuild a routine. I cleaned the apartment, folded the laundry that had been sitting in a pile for weeks, and made a point to go outside each morning. The city still felt strange, like a place I didn't quite belong, but I kept walking. I even reached out to an old friend. The conversation was awkward, full of long pauses, but it reminded me that I wasn't completely untethered. When I scheduled my next session with Dr. Pryatt, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in a long time: optimism. By the time I stepped into Dr. Pryatt's office for my third session, the unease I'd been initially carrying had settled into something dull, like a faint hum at the back of my mind. I told myself it was nothing, just leftover nerves. The waiting room was just as empty as before, just as silent. Only this time, it felt like the silence was holding its breath, waiting for something. When he opened the door, I froze. He was taller. I was sure of it. The first time we met, he'd been imposing, sure, but now his frame seemed stretched, his head brushing the top of the doorway as he stepped back to let me in. He was thinner, too. His cheekbones looked sharper, his skin pale enough that I could see faint veins running beneath the surface. I blinked, shook my head. It was probably just the lighting. Stress playing tricks on me again. "Elliot," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "Come in." I hesitated for a beat before walking into the office. It was the same as always, plain, sparse, clinical. But as I sat down, I noticed the air felt heavier, the kind of weight that presses on your chest, making it harder to breathe. "How are you feeling this week?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. His movements were fluid, too precise. His dark eyes stayed fixed on mine, unblinking. I fumbled for words. "Better, I think, but I don't know. It's like there's this pressure, like I definitely noticed the progress, but everything still feels wrong somehow." He tilted his head, studying me. "Progress often brings discomfort," he said. "When we begin to confront what lies beneath, it's natural to feel resistance. Chaos is not meant to be comfortable, Elliot. It's meant to transform." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, but I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Movement. Dark tendrils, thin and writhing, curling from the top of his head. They swayed gently, like smoke caught in an invisible breeze. I turned my head sharply, focusing on him. The tendrils were gone, replaced by the sharp outline of his neatly combed hair. My heart thudded against my ribs. Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaky. He raised an eyebrow, his expression calm. See what, Elliot? I felt my face flush. Nothing. It's probably nothing. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving mine. It's not uncommon to notice distortions as you go deeper into the process, he said, his voice soothing, but laced with something I couldn't place. These glimpses, whatever they are, they're part of the work. I didn't know what he meant, but I didn't ask. Something about the way he spoke made it clear I wouldn't like the answer. The rest of the session passed in a haze. His questions were sharper, more direct, digging into things I hadn't realized I'd buried. By the time I left, I felt wrung out, like something had been pulled from me that I wasn't ready to let go of. As I stepped into the hallway, I glanced back. Dr. Pryatt stood in the doorway, his tall, lean frame silhouetted against the dim light of his office. For a moment, I thought I saw the tendrils again, coiling above his head like smoke. But when I blinked, they were gone. The walk home felt longer than usual. The city streets seemed darker, the shadows stretching farther than they should. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly, like something was following me just out of sight. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That night, the dreams came back stronger. Shadows loomed, twisting and crawling, whispering things I couldn't understand. And when I woke, drenched in sweat, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back, but a part of me knew I would. By the time I returned to Dr. Pryatt's office for my 4th session, I experienced something darker. The waiting room's silence wasn't just oppressive, it was suffocating. The air felt dense, like stepping into a room where something terrible had just happened, but left no trace. When the door to his office opened, I couldn't suppress the shiver that ran down my spine. Dr. Pryatt wasn't just taller now, he was impossibly tall. His head nearly scraped the ceiling, his body stretched to an unsettling degree. His limbs seemed too long, his hands too slender, the pale skin pulled taut over his sharp bones. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but it was harder now. "Elliot," he said, his voice as calm and measured as always. "Come in." I hesitated, but his gaze held mine, drawing me forward like a thread pulling tight. His office felt different this time. The walls seemed closer, the lighting dimmer. I sat down, and for the first time I noticed his shadow. It stretched across the floor in jagged shapes, moving faintly as if alive. "How have you been feeling this week?" he asked, leaning forward. The way his body folded made my stomach churn, the joints bending too smoothly, like a marionette with invisible strings. My voice cracked. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know how to articulate that I saw his face in the shadows now, watching me, whispering things I couldn't understand. My reflection in the mirror no longer felt like my own. "I don't think I'm doing well," I admitted. "It's like I don't know what's real anymore." His thin lips curled into the faintest smile. "That's progress, Elliot," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're breaking through." "Breaking through to what?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He tilted his head, his dark eyes gleaming. "Understanding. Freedom. Chaos must dismantle the false structures you've built before you can rebuild." As he spoke, I caught it again. Those tendrils curling from his head, writhing in the air like smoke. This time I didn't blink. I stared, my heart pounding as they twisted and swayed, reaching higher, darker. "What is that?" I whispered, unable to stop myself. My throat was dry, the words barely escaping. He leaned back, the tendrils dissolving into the shadows. "What do you see, Elliot?" My breath caught. I thought I saw something above you." "Perhaps," he said, his voice almost amused. "Or perhaps your mind is simply opening." The rest of the session blurred. His questions were sharper than ever, peeling back layers I hadn't realized I'd kept hidden. By the time I left, my chest felt hollow, as though he'd reached inside and scooped something out. I stumbled into the hallway, not daring to look back. The air outside felt heavier than before, the city darker, its edges distorted. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The feeling that I was being followed clung to me all the way home. That night, the dreams consumed me. Shadows stretched long, spilling from corners where they shouldn't exist, and in every one I saw him, taller, thinner, his dark eyes piercing through the void, pulling me deeper into the chaos. By the time I sat down to record one of our sessions, I was sure I was losing my mind. I needed proof that Dr. Pryatt was real, that he wasn't just some warped creation of my unraveling mind. I set my phone discreetly on the arm of the chair during my next visit, its screen black, but recording everything. My hands shook the entire session. He was taller again. His head now grazed the ceiling, and his limbs were unnaturally long, stretched to a point that seemed to defy reason. The room felt suffocating, the walls pressing closer, the air heavy and stale. "Elliot," he said, his voice calm, deliberate. "You seem unsettled." "I'm fine," I lied, though my voice cracked. "Just tired." He tilted his head, the movement slow, deliberate. "Tired, yes. You've been carrying so much, haven't you? The weight of your regret, your fear, your failure. But you're almost there." "Almost where?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, sharp and predatory. "To the truth." I couldn't hold back anymore. "What are you?" The words spilled out, desperate, trembling. "You're not normal. You can't be." His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than before. "What do you think I am, Elliot?" I pointed to his head, to the dark, writhing tendrils that had become impossible to ignore. They pulsed and coiled, faintly glowing like some unholy halo. "That! I see it! I know I see it!" He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked pleased. "Good," he said softly. "You're beginning to see clearly." My breath came in short gasps. The room felt smaller, darker. The shadows in the corner seemed to stretch toward me, alive and hungry. "I don't want this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Don't you?" He countered, leaning forward until his impossibly long frame loomed over me. "You came to me. You sought me out. You asked for help." "I didn't ask for this," I shouted, my voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. His smile never wavered. "Chaos is what you needed, Elliot, and chaos is what you found. You didn't find joy in your life anymore. You won't even know what you're missing, only what you've gained." The scalp atop his head rose, at first like a goose egg, then warping into flame-like tendrils. I bolted out of the chair, backing toward the door. His shadow stretched impossibly long, curling around my feet like it wanted to hold me in place. The tendrils above his head swayed and pulsed, and when I blinked, they seemed closer, reaching for me. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling. "You're not real." He tilted his head again, his dark eyes gleaming. "Aren't I?" I stumbled out of the office and into the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. The space felt wrong, like the walls were bending in on themselves. The air was thick, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I ran without looking back, bursting out of the building and into the cold night air. When I got home, I played the recording. My heart sank. There was no voice, no movement, no sound of tendrils writhing in the shadows. Just me, talking to nothing, my voice fractured and desperate. That night, the whispers didn't just come from the shadows, they came from inside my own head. I couldn't go back after that. The thought of stepping into Dr. Pryatt's office again made my skin crawl. I resolved to cut him out of my life completely, no matter how strong the pull to return was. I felt like a part of me still needed to see him, but I ignored it. A week later, I worked up the nerve to call his office, thinking I'd leave a message to formally cancel. The phone rang and rang, but it never went to voicemail. I hung up, then tried again later. Same result. No answer, no automated response, just endless, empty ringing. Something felt wrong. I decided to go to his office in person to make sure it was real, to prove to myself that he was real. When I arrived, the building felt different. The dim lights in the hallway cast shadows that seemed longer, stretching unnaturally toward me. I stopped in front of what should have been his door, but there was nothing. The gold lettering, the frosted glass, the faint hum of the desk fan, it was all gone. In its place was a blank storefront. The window was solid now, the room beyond completely dark. I pressed my hand to the glass, hoping to feel some faint warmth, some proof that it had been there. But it was cold, like touching the surface of a stone that had never seen sunlight. I asked the building manager, a tired man with a bored expression, if he knew what had happened to the counselor's office. He frowned at me, squinting like I'd just asked something ridiculous. "Counselor? Nobody's rented that space in years. Just a storage room," he said, walking off before I could respond. The hallway felt narrower now, the air heavier. I stepped back, staring at the blank glass as if it might change, but it didn't. The silence in the building was so oppressive I could hear my own heartbeat. I left quickly, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. By the time I reached the street, I was shaking. When I glanced back at the building, it looked smaller somehow, like it didn't belong in this world. At home, the whispers were waiting for me, louder than ever. Every shadow in the apartment felt alive, curling around me, pulling me closer. My reflection in the mirror stared back with eyes that didn't feel like my own. And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, I thought I heard his voice. "You're almost there, Elliot." I stopped sleeping after that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw him, not in the way a memory lingers, but like he was truly there, standing at the edge of the dark, watching. His form would shift, taller, thinner, his limbs elongated into impossible shapes. And always those tendrils writhed above his head, growing darker and more vibrant, pulsing like they carried some unspeakable power. I could feel him reaching for me. But it wasn't just the nights anymore. During the day, his voice echoed in my head, soft and patient, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You're almost there, Elliot." It repeated over and over, a mantra I couldn't escape. Even when I plugged my ears, it came from somewhere deeper, vibrating in my bones. I tried everything to make it stop. I turned up music until the speakers cracked, screamed into pillows, swallowed whiskey until my hands stopped shaking, but none of it worked. Dr. Pryatt's voice was inside me now, etched into the cracks of my mind. One night, desperate for answers, I flipped through the notebook I kept after our sessions. It was filled with scrawled half-thoughts, fragments of what I'd taken from his words. But as I read, the phrases began to blur together, forming patterns I hadn't noticed before. There were symbols hidden in my handwriting, spirals and jagged marks that seemed to pulse on the page. They weren't mine. I didn't remember writing them. I turned the notebook over and found a single phrase scratched into the back cover, written in a jagged hand I didn't recognize. He is the chaos between stars, the last voice you will ever hear. I threw the notebook across the room and pressed my palms to my eyes, shaking. This isn't real, I muttered to myself. It can't be real. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to ripple in response. They stretched toward me, curling like the tendrils I'd seen above his head. For the first time, I noticed something else in the darkness, faint pinpricks of light, scattered like stars in the void. They pulsed, growing brighter and dimmer, as if alive. Then I felt it, his presence, not imagined, not in my mind, but truly there, standing behind me. You've finally seen it, he said, his voice so close it made my skin crawl. I turned, expecting him to be there, towering and impossible, but I was alone. The apartment was silent again, but the shadows didn't recede. They lingered, darker than before, coiling like they were waiting for something. I tried to run. I grabbed my coat, my keys, anything to get out of that suffocating space. But when I stepped into the hallway, it wasn't the hallway anymore. The air was thick, suffused with a faint hum that vibrated in my chest. The walls stretched endlessly in both directions, pulsating as though alive. And at the far end, where there should have been an elevator, there was only darkness, deep and infinite. I felt it pulling at me, dragging me forward even as my legs refused to move. Dr. Pryatt's voice came again, smooth and deliberate. This is what you asked for, Elliot. The truth. No, I whispered, backing away. I didn't ask for this. But you did, he said, his voice filling the space. You sought me out. You wanted freedom, and now you are free. The darkness surged toward me, spilling out of the walls like a living thing. I turned and ran, but the hallway twisted and shifted with every step. The lights above flickered, casting strange shadows that stretched and twisted, mocking me. And then, ahead of me, he appeared. Dr. Pryatt stood impossibly tall, his head scraping the pulsating ceiling. His face was sharper now, the skin stretched so tightly over his bones that it seemed ready to tear. His tendrils had grown, writhing wildly, their tips sparking faintly with flickers of sickly yellow light. His eyes, empty and black, locked onto mine. You were never meant to understand, he said, stepping toward me. His voice was deeper now, layered, as though it carried the echoes of countless others speaking in unison. I am the last step, Elliot. The chaos that frees you from the illusion of control. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness closed in, swallowing the walls, the floor, the very air around me. And then he raised a hand, long, skeletal fingers reaching out. The tendrils swirled and twisted faster, their glow growing blinding. When his hand touched my chest, I felt it all at once. The weight of the stars, the cold expanse of endless void, the laughter of something ancient and cruel. My body burned, and then it dissolved, scattering like dust into the nothingness. I woke up in my apartment gasping for air. My heart pounded as I clutched at the couch, half expecting the shadows to swallow me whole. But everything was quiet. The room was still. For a moment I thought it had been a dream. But then I saw the mirror across the room. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't my face. It was his. Dr. Pryatt's sharp, angular features, his dark eyes gleaming with something I couldn't name. I stumbled back, clutching my chest, but his reflection didn't move. It just smiled. Now I understand. He never wanted to consume me. He wanted me to become him. The whispers are gone now. The shadows no longer scare me. And sometimes late at night, I hear his voice, calm and deliberate, guiding me, not as a patient, but as a successor. I am finally free, and I am willing.
You've just heard Chaos Beneath the Stars, written by N.M. Brown, performed by Malcolm Blackwood, with production by Aaron Sawicki. This story was originally featured on Scary Stories Told in the Dark, and we're proud to bring it to you again tonight to highlight Malcolm Blackwood's exceptional work as both host and narrator. If you enjoyed tonight's performance, we encourage you to explore Scary Stories Told in the Dark, now in its 19th season. New episodes premiere every Sunday on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel and are available wherever your favorite podcasts can be found. Hundreds of episodes await you, including an extensive archive featuring the unforgettable performances of original host Otis Geary, alongside Malcolm's more recent contributions. There is no shortage of terror waiting for you. Why not dive in tonight? And if you haven't already, please consider following Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, leaving us a 5-star rating or review, and sharing the show with a fellow fan of the macabre. You can even find more terrifying tales at creepypastastories.com and stay up to date with Evil Idol 2025 and all our latest releases by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Of course, be sure to check out Scary Stories Told in the Dark, now in its 19th season, with new episodes premiering every Sunday on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel or wherever your favorite podcasts can be found. Hundreds of episodes await you, including an extensive archive featuring the unforgettable performances of Otis Geary, alongside newer installments hosted by Malcolm Blackwood. Memberships are available now at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, offering ad-free listening, early access, exclusive content, and our complete archive for $7.99 per month, with discounted annual options. Follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok, and as always, thank you for spending part of your night with us. And now, fellow lover of the macabre, I'm afraid our evening together draws to a close. You've been listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Until next time, I'm your host, Nicholas Goroff, filling in for Steve Taylor, reminding you to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listeners. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.
Good evening. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm Nicholas Goroff, filling in for Steve Taylor tonight, and I'll be your host. This evening, we're bringing you a haunting tale that explores isolation, grief, and the terrifying possibility that something in the darkness knows us better than we know ourselves. It's a story about voices, familiar ones, and the danger of answering when they call. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to support the show and unlock exclusive content, consider joining our patrons area. For just $7.99 per month, you'll gain access to ad-free episodes, early releases, exclusive bonus stories, and extended content you won't hear anywhere else. It's our way of giving something special back to those who help make this show possible. Your support directly contributes to production costs, narrator compensation, and the continued growth of the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights network. To sign up, visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com. That's chillingtalesfordarknights.com and become a member today. Be sure to subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, leaving a rating and review goes a long way toward helping other horror fans discover us. And don't forget to subscribe to the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, where you'll find a growing library of narrated horror and new releases throughout the week. Tonight's story comes from author William Tudor, and was originally featured on another show in our network, Horror Hill, on September 15th, 2022. We're revisiting it now to spotlight the exceptional talents of its narrator and producer, Eric Peabody, the longtime host of Horror Hill. Now in its 14th season, Horror Hill continues to deliver richly atmospheric horror fiction every Thursday on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel and wherever your favorite podcasts can be found. With hundreds of episodes already available, it's a must-listen for fans of immersive and literary horror. After you listen tonight, do yourself a favor if you haven't already, and check it out. In tonight's tale of terror, a grieving father retreats to a remote lakeside cottage, hoping solitude might quiet the ache of loss. But beyond the water stands an ancient forest, steeped in whispered legend, and something within it has learned how to speak in the voices we trust most. When sorrow opens the door, something unexpected answers. Without further ado, from author William Tudor, performed and produced by Eric Peabody, I present to you The Eater of Light.
Valen Forest, Derbyshire, 1984. I sat in the driver's seat of my aging Ford Granada and listened to the rain pound relentlessly on the car's metal roof, a sound I had always found strangely soothing. Once the torrent subsided, I looked outside to watch late afternoon mists coil and dance across the undulating surface of the lake, the rocky shore of which provided access to the cottage I would be renting for the next few weeks. Beyond the lake stood Valen Forest, where towering fir trees loomed like foreboding sentinels that swayed hypnotically in the stiff October breeze. The purpose of this solo trip was a matter of healing. I had recently finalized my divorce from my wife, Elizabeth. The separation was her idea, although there had been no great transgressions on my part. Whilst we had been steadily drifting apart for some time, the real catalyst had been the sudden death of our 9-month-old daughter, Charlotte, nearly 2 years previously. The reason given on her death certificate was SIDS, or Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. She had simply ceased breathing in her sleep. There were no warning signs to speak of, and no illness to foreshadow her demise. I had awoken one night to Elizabeth screaming in Charlotte's room. When I rushed to see what the commotion was about, my mind still hazy from bourbon and sleeping pills, I found Elizabeth hysterical and cradling Charlotte's limp body in her arms. Her face was a bluish gray, her eyes barren, fingers ice cold when I held them to my cheek, devoid of the warmth normally bestowed by life. The months that followed were a nightmare for both of us. Mostly, I was on autopilot, unable to allow myself to grieve in a normal and healthy way. As a usually robust man of 6 feet and 200 pounds, I quickly lost weight to the point of becoming skeletal. My complexion grew pallid, whilst my black hair and beard succumbed to premature grayness, the toll of my grief visible for all to see, even if I couldn't express it directly. Elizabeth was the direct opposite, and yielded to her anguish so completely that it consumed her. In truth, I was jealous of her ability to feel, whilst on some level, I must also admit that I resented what felt like gratuitous wallowing. I just felt a sickening emptiness every time I thought of that night and those cold, lifeless fingers against my cheek, her hand small and fragile, yet heavy with the burden of loss. Elizabeth eventually returned to some semblance of normality, working through her grief to attain a point of reluctant acceptance. I dragged myself out of the car and inhaled crisp autumn air into my lungs to clear my head. Many of the trees surrounding the lake were vibrant with rusted hues of red, brown, and gold, which stood in contrast to the evergreens of Valen Forest itself. Even from this distance, I could hear the noise of the wind as it coursed through the twisted and gnarled limbs of the woodland's inhabitants, the dense canopy shifting under strain, almost breathing as though the forest itself was a vast living entity. I turned to regard the cottage behind me, a small single-story house with weathered cream exterior walls and a dark slate roof that looked like it needed repairs in several places. I quickly locked the car, a habit of inner-city living that had no meaning in a place like this, and made my way up the cottage's gravel path. I approached the front door with its cracked black paint and fumbled for the keys the agent had given me. They were as old and corroded as the cottage itself. A paper sticker bore my name, Sean McGuire, with the collection date in blue bureau that was starting to streak with the rain. When I unlocked the door, it swung open lethargically on rusted hinges to reveal a dim and shadowed room beyond. The air smelled heavy and damp. I hadn't expected luxury by any means. The pictures in the brochure had prepared me for a back-to-basics lifestyle, but I still felt a sense of unease that this would be home for a while. I dragged myself and my bags inside and searched for the light switch, the single bulb adorned by a dated beige lampshade casting a subdued light. The room itself was a simple affair. A taupe sofa and chair were arranged around an old-fashioned coffee table. The heavy chimney stack contained a large black iron grate in which logs had been arranged in a triangle. A pine TV stand was placed in the corner, upon which sat a large television with a huge bulbous back. None of the furniture matched. A narrow hallway led to the bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. The bedroom and bathroom were generously sized, but the kitchen was small and awkward to maneuver around, but was sufficient for one. It was late afternoon by the time I had unpacked and got myself settled. I lit the log fire to take the chill off the air and warmed up some pre-prepared food in the small gas oven that had yellowed with age. I also put on the TV for sound, to create a vague sense of company for myself. With the fire glowing and a few candles lit, the cottage was almost starting to feel cozy. After my meal, I stepped outside to get a feel for the surrounding area. It was dusk now, a dark purple sky tinged with wispy veins of yellow and amber. I walked down the path and made my way to the water's edge. My feet crunched satisfyingly on the rocks that formed its shoreline, and I delighted at my breath being visible in the frigid dusk air. This had always been my favorite time of year, when summer succumbed to the onset of autumn and altogether fresher conditions. The lake was vast, with still waters that reflected the hues of the sky above in a vivid and mesmerizing fashion. About the lake's perimeter were lights from the windows of cottages and farmsteads sporadically scattered around its border. These were signs of life, yet sufficiently distant to still give me that sense of isolation I craved. I will admit, however, that it was also comforting to know I wasn't completely alone out here. City people tend to romanticize rural solitude in a way that rarely accords with reality. The first few days were spent lazily unpacking my belongings and acclimatizing to the solitude of this place, with occasional walks by the lake during the day and reading in front of the roaring log fire in the evening. Eventually, I felt courageous enough to explore Valen Forest itself. On the day of my planned hike, I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., so I would have plenty of time to explore the woodland before dusk set in. I ate breakfast with strong black coffee and prepared for my excursion. I pulled on my hiking gear, including my thick mustard jumper, olive walking trousers, and padded orange jacket, and filled a small rucksack with supplies. I chose to head north, away from the more populated areas, and soon came to a point where the lake narrowed into a ravine. A wooden bridge facilitated access to the other side and the sprawling forest beyond. The bridge itself was a modern affair of distinctly Nordic architecture. Upon reaching the path on the other side, I paused to survey my surroundings and soak up the peculiar atmosphere of this place. I wanted to explore the depths of this majestic forest landscape. Still, trepidation had instantly seized me, encroaching anxiety that began in the pit of my stomach to seep outwards towards my extremities, causing my fingers and lips to tremble discernibly. I cursed myself for my sudden infirmity. I was not inherently anxious, so why did I suddenly apprehend such a great fear of this place? Pushing my unease aside, I followed the path that led from the bridge to make a mental note of the general direction in which to return. The thick forest allowed for little light, and a tangible gloom seemed to hang in the very air of this place. The path that I followed appeared well trodden, and I assumed it to be a popular hiking route in the summer months. Occasionally, the landscape would thin out and relinquish scenery of such outstanding beauty that I began to develop a real sense of awe for Valen Forest. I would often stop to marvel at some sight or sound. The churning of a stream as waterfowl glided across its surface, or the sound of a distant heron or raven. I must have walked around an hour before the forest dispersed into a large clearing. I intended to rest, but something strange caught my eye, roughly 10 meters from where I sat, and I edged forward cautiously to get a better look. A small stone circle had been arranged on an even and slightly elevated patch of ground. Above its perimeter were 5 severed fox heads, their glassy and lifeless eyes staring back at me as the breeze gently touched their matted fur. At the center of the circle were the ashen remnants of a fire. The closer I got, the more I could smell the burned incense of jasmine, frankincense, and patchouli. It was as though this obscene display had been the focal point of some bizarre ritual, and I assumed it was meant to serve as an altar. But to what purpose? Each of the heads had a substance smeared upon their brow, as if consecrated by a priest on Ash Wednesday. It was as though something sinister clung to the very air of this place. It was both invisible yet strangely tangible, and seemed to permeate my being to the point that I immediately felt infected by it. I quickly took a step back and tried to steady my breathing as my mind raced, desperately trying to rationalize the situation's absurdity. It was then that I heard the sound of something familiar, and instantly, my stomach lurched with a new terror. From the area behind the trees directly in front of me, I heard her voice for the first time in years. The sound of my baby daughter's cries. It was unmistakable, the sound particular to Charlotte, an urgent cry that usually meant that she needed to be fed or consoled. I had the sudden overwhelming urge to run towards the sound, but remained rooted to the spot, completely transfixed. The sound came again, this time sharper and more abrupt, as though she had suddenly been afflicted with pain. Although I knew it could not possibly be her, I still raised my feet slowly and moved towards the sound. When the scream of pain came again, my body was filled with a sudden impetus, not to run to the perceived source, to console my infant daughter, but to turn and flee from whatever sinister being was mimicking her and cruelly mocking my grief. I charged through the woods in the direction I had come, thankful that most of it was downhill, fear and adrenaline propelling me forward. Relief finally came as I exited the forest to collapse, exhausted, against the bridge rail, my heart pounding and my lungs on fire from the frenetic exertion. Before standing, I heard Charlotte's cries again, from deep within the forest. I immediately pulled myself to my feet and pushed onward towards the cottage. Upon my return, I raced into the kitchen and tore off my clothes, throwing them into the washing machine before heading straight for the bathroom and plunging into the shower, as though trying to remove the stain of that place. I spent the rest of the evening in a sullen state as I dwelled relentlessly upon the sound of Charlotte's cries, old wounds afresh within my psyche. I tried everything to rationalize my experience. Could it have been a hallucination induced by the anxiety of that place? Was it a lack of sleep and food that led my mind to perceive things that were not really there? Could the cry have been the sound of an animal? There must be a rational explanation. I had sought rural isolation to find a much-needed sense of peace and freedom, only to find myself drawn into a connection with forces beyond my comprehension. Either that or my mind had finally failed me to the extent that I was actually hearing my dead infant daughter cry out from the forest. Turning in for the night, I found sleep elusive, but finally drifted into slumber sometime around midnight. I jolted violently awake, sucking in air as though I had been struggling to breathe in my sleep. The bedside clock told me it was 3 a.m. Climbing from my bed, I walked from the bedroom to the living room and opened the front door, stepping outside to draw fresh air into my lungs. Above me churned a vast night sky in ominous hues of black, whilst the wind coursed about me like a choir of unfettered whispers. I walked the short distance to the shore of the lake as I wanted to look at the forest again, where I had witnessed such strange events only hours earlier. A sharp crescent moon cast a narrow, shimmering path of light that stretched from the opposite side of the lake to where I stood, silently observing as the light flitted across the water's surface. I turned to survey my immediate surroundings, the veiled shadow meadows on either side of the cottage, and the forest entrance further up the gravel path to the north. Then, something on the trail drew my attention, and I narrowed my eyes to try and see more clearly. A shadowy humanoid form stood near the base of a tree on the path I had used to return home. Whilst the form was nebulous and difficult to clearly discern, its outline was unmistakably that of a female. Was it a natural formation or an actual person? My heart leapt in a painful spasm that momentarily stole my breath as the figure moved to confirm my fear that I was not alone out here. As she approached, I watched the figure gain clarity as though drawing power from the moon itself. From her featureless black face, 2 shining golden eyes appeared. Her body was solid yet enshrouded by a vaporous mist, like black liquid nitrogen that billowed down to her feet and then outwards to gradually dissipate in the ether. Her long, flowing garments belonged to another time. Then the sound of Charlotte's cries came again as the apparition lowered her arms, hands disappearing into her vestments, to remove something pale and heavy. My stomach churned with disgust as the figure held the writhing body of my baby daughter aloft, suspended in the air by one hand that was clenched tightly around her throat, blood drawn and weeping where long fingernails had found vicious purchase. Her naked body dangled and flailed against the assault as she screamed in pain, her eyes turning towards me pleadingly, her cries straining under the vice-like grip on her supple throat. I turned and fled to the sanctuary of the cottage, slamming the door behind me and flicking on the light, shaking hands clumsily securing the bolts. My legs buckled beneath me as I turned and frantically clawed my way across the floor to prop myself upright against the front of the sofa, eyes never leaving the door as the room was suddenly plunged into momentary silence. My respite was to be short-lived. Whilst the sound of Charlotte's cries had slowly receded to nothingness, I suddenly became aware of the sound of scratching at the door. Then Charlotte's cries started again as more voices came, a crescendo of layered whispers, wherein individual voices were impossible to discern. Fingers began to tap on all of the windows at once, as though a group of people had surrounded the house. Anger boiled in my blood, and I summoned the strength to pick up the coffee table and throw it at the door, quickly falling to my hands and knees again with the exertion. "Leave me the fuck alone!" I bellowed the words, a struggle to form in my traumatized state. Suddenly, all the noises abated, and the silence was deafening. The atmosphere in the room suddenly thick with static and tension as the hairs on my body began to rise. From the corner came a new voice, one that was actually inside the house. "My boy, open the door," it pleaded. "I need to see you, please, Sean." It is my mother's voice, with its unmistakable heavy Irish accent. My mother passed away over a decade ago. Her voice hits me like a truck, but I know it is not her. I fled to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me and hearing the sound of laughter behind me as I did so. The sound of my mother's laughter, yet somehow different, inhuman almost, and tinged with cruelty and malice. No more sounds came that night, and I eventually pushed the bed up against the door and collapsed on it to sleep for a few precious hours. I awoke exhausted to the morning light filtering through the garish golden curtains of the cottage bedroom window. Feeling nauseous from fatigue, I pushed myself off the bed and dragged it back across the room. I found the cottage to be just as I had left it the previous night. I quickly straightened up the place and opened the window to allow some fresh air in despite the cold, as though it would somehow help cleanse the room of last night's events. The rest of the day was spent in a state of gnawing anxiety as I tried to rationalize my experience. Could it have been the result of sleepwalking, a waking dream? Or could it be that in such a secluded and isolated location, without the distractions of city living, the true extent of my mental decline was becoming apparent? There was no denying that there was something strange about this area. Valen Forest had a rich history of witchcraft, and was the home to the most notorious witch in British history, an unashamed demon worshipper executed in the region for the most unbelievable crimes. Whilst I have never been a believer in such things, it cannot be denied that they can exert an enormous psychological effect on people, particularly those in a vulnerable state. I questioned whether this could have influenced the visions I had experienced. I abandoned all plans of exploration that day and instead hung around the cottage drinking coffee and trying to occupy my mind. I retired early to bed at 9 p.m. and quickly succumbed to sleep. My mind was assailed by vivid nightmares, crying infants and desolate places, dark, foreboding landscapes wherein skinless beings lurked in shadow yet watched with glowing eyes, their chattering teeth like the stridulation of a cricket swarm. I awoke suddenly with a violent spasm that snapped my mind into waking reality, yet I found that my body was frozen. My limbs were cold and heavy as though paralyzed, whilst saliva seeped from the corner of my mouth. It was then that I saw a dark shadow in the corner of the bedroom, like a nebulous column of black smoke that caused the air around it to distort. A noise, like a low hum or vibration, radiated from that part of the room. Her face appeared again from the black miasma, and my heart began to thunder at the sight of two radiant eye slits that opened to regard me with contempt, like a lion stalking its prey. Her form shambled forward awkwardly, as though in stop motion, as a multitude of voices came, of dying lambs and crying babies, of breaking bones and chattering teeth. I watched on helplessly as the figure loomed above me, her form slowly twisting into shape like a crooked and gnarled tree. A large hand with spindly fingers veiled my face, and I was instantly lost to the darkness. Oblivion. I awoke once more to the intrusion of dawn, and my entire body ached as I shifted myself into an upright position. No dreams lingered. No dark recollections of my time in the void. Just the vague impression of a woman's voice that echoed in my mind. I am Beslith, the Eater of Light. My mind was firm. I must escape from this place. I quickly grabbed my belongings, shoved them into my suitcases, and threw everything haphazardly into the boot of my car. Crawling into the driver's seat, I tried the ignition without even bothering to secure my seatbelt. Nothing. I tried again. Dead. Exasperated, I slammed my fist on the steering wheel and climbed back out to look inside the engine bay. I know nothing about cars, but everything seemed to be in order, with no obvious burn marks or damage. Defeated and cursing, I slammed the hood and headed for the nearest town. Wellsbrook is a typically English rural village wherein the locals are all intimately familiar with each other's lives and possess a subtle hostility towards outsiders. I located the local shop with its aged timber windows, crisp net curtains, and a chalkboard outside indicating that you could get fresh eggs, bread, and milk daily. Approaching the counter, I found a heavy-set ginger-haired gentleman with a full beard hunched over the counter, reading a newspaper that was set between two chunky and freckled forearms. He looked up suddenly when my presence snapped him out of his concentration. His eyes were a pale blue, yet possessed a hardness not befitting a shopkeeper. His forearm tattoos confirmed my suspicion. Ex-military. The rural shop in such an isolated location was probably the result of his own yearning for a quieter, more subdued existence. I hoped he was having more success than I was. "Good morning," I said, trying my best to sound friendly. "Mornin'," came the gruff reply as he lumbered into an upright position. He was a lot taller than I had first reckoned, and would not look out of place working the doors in a rough East London nightclub. Feeling the need to purchase something, I picked up a bottle of water and a local newspaper from the stack, knowing I would never actually read it. "Just these, please," I said awkwardly, placing them on the counter. "That'll be 40 pence. I quickly handed over the money. "Staying local, are ya?" "Yes, I'm renting a cottage near the lake about 2 miles up the road." "Oh, of course, yeah. The old Evans place." His demeanor softening just a little. "Saw you there yesterday morning when I was out making deliveries. The Evans passed away a few years back, and the daughter now lets the place out to tourists. She didn't want to live there, apparently. Getting a fancy job in the city is what I heard. Nice little place, though." He paused briefly. "Listen, mate, just a word of advice, but do be careful if you head into the woods by yourself. Valen Forest is vast and can be a very disorienting place if you don't know it well. The last thing we locals need is to send out another party of volunteers to search for hikers who have gone and got themselves lost." "Thanks, I'll bear that in mind," I replied. "Is there a mechanic in town? I'm having an issue with my car. It won't start." "Not here, mate, but there's one in the next town over, but that's nearly 20 miles away." "Oh, I see." I sighed wearily. "Do you have a number for them at all?" "Yeah, mate, just a second." He disappeared into the back room for a few minutes before emerging with a number scrawled on a post-it note. "Here you go. There's a payphone on the other side of the village. You give him a call. He'll sort you out. Anyway, what's your name?" he inquired. "Sean." "I'm Frank. I'm open most days if you need anything and can deliver too if needs be. Just let me know." I quickly said my goodbyes, located the overgrown payphone that looked as though it hadn't been used in years, and dialed the number on an ancient and corroded keypad. "Hello?" a voice answered, its timbre thin and crackly. "Hi, is this the mechanic?" "It is, mate. How can I help?" "I'm having issues with my car. The engine appears dead. Won't turn over at all, and I'm trying to get home. I'm staying in a small cottage near the lake just outside Wellsbrook. The old Evans place, apparently, if that means anything to you." "It does, mate. I can come tomorrow afternoon if that's any use." "Can you not come sooner? I'm actually rather keen to be on my way." "Nah, sorry, mate. It'll be tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Best I can do, sorry." Realizing I had little choice in the matter, I agreed to the time and made my way back to Frank's shop, picking up a bottle of Jim Beam to help me get through the night to come. On the journey home, I pondered my predicament. Had the events of the last few years, which started with Charlotte's death and culminated in my divorce from Elizabeth, really damaged my mind to such an extent? Was it possible that the degree of my mental decline had only really become apparent once I had isolated myself in such a rural area as this? A more immediate concern was how I would survive the night to come. That thing was bound to return to torment me again. When I arrived back at the cottage, I quickly ate and then prepared the place to leave for good the following morning. This would be the last night I would ever spend in this place. I would be walking home if the car could not be fixed, whatever it took. I then sat and drank straight from the bottle. I had drained half of it before long. Even so, the gnawing anxiety remained, so I kept drinking until I succumbed to intoxication and exhaustion so completely that I staggered through to the bedroom and collapsed on the bed, the oblivion of sleep consuming me instantly, the sanctuary of nothingness. I awoke once more gasping for air, initially unsure of my surroundings until the reality of the past few days swarmed my mind. It was dark outside, and the hands of my watch, although difficult to discern in the gloom, told me it was 3 a.m. My mouth was bone dry, and nausea churned in my stomach. A subtle movement, like the flitting of a shadow, drew my attention to the foot of the bed, where she stood. A tall, black, twisted form, with a radiant yet penetrating gaze. A silent voyeur that had watched me sleep for a time undetermined. My senses swayed as she crept up my paralyzed body. Bezlith, the Eater of Light. She seized me with hands that were impossibly large for a woman and brutally strong, pushing my head down into the bed with horrifying force. Her mouth split open like a serrated laceration, a gaping maw of obsidian teeth. From her open mouth, a sound emerged, like the thunderous roar of a waterfall, and her body shook with the sheer violence of it. An icy cold seeped into the top of my skull as she poured her essence into me, as though I were a vacant vessel to be filled. I lay motionless and powerless as her form began to fade, dissipating like cinders in the rain, until I found myself alone. The room plunged into a sudden stillness. Then, the voices began to emanate from within me, and I knew that I had finally succumbed to this malevolent being that dwells in the absence of light. It is dawn now, and the morning grows like an open wound in the veiled windows of the cottage. I resent its presence. It is intrusive, like a sordid scrutiny of a peeping Tom, and I find myself both fearing and dreading the light. I do not remember doing so, but I have positioned a chair in the center of the living room and clawed away the ceiling plaster to expose a heavy wooden beam. My hands still bleed profusely from the frantic efforts of this. The long wire from the ancient TV has been tied around the beam, and there is a wide, open noose at the other end that sways hypnotically in slow circular motions as I continue to stare at it with an unwavering gaze from my position on the floor. Charlotte continues to cry for me, and many voices beckon me to the void. I am no longer afraid. Soon, I will be joining them.
You've just heard The Eater of Light, written by William Tudor and performed and produced by Eric Peabody. There's something uniquely unsettling about horror that doesn't rely on brute force, but instead on memory, familiarity, and grief. When something can borrow the voice of someone you've lost, where do you turn? And, dear listener, what would you do if something nefarious masqueraded as what or who you love most? Food for thought. If you enjoyed tonight's story and Eric Peabody's performance, I encourage you to explore Horror Hill. Now in its 14th season, Horror Hill features new episodes every Thursday on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel and wherever your favorite podcasts can be found. With hundreds of episodes already available, there's a vast archive of expertly narrated horror waiting for you. If you've enjoyed this evening's presentation, don't forget to subscribe, follow, and leave a review wherever you listen. It truly helps the show and ensures we can continue bringing these stories to life. For ad-free episodes, early access, exclusive bonus content, and more, join our patrons area for just $7.99 per month at chillingtalesfordarknights.com. And now, my fellow denizens of the dark, our evening together draws to a close. You've been listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Until next time, I'm your host, Nicholas Goroff, filling in for Steve Taylor, thanking you for joining us. and reminding you to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listeners. Sweet dreams.
Chilling tales for dark nights.